Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt, and today we are going to be covering the past 48 hours of breaking news here on day 1224 of the breaking news stream. We have a large amount of news from around the world, but before I get into that, I do have to make a special note to all of y'all that Enforcer Matt is here, but he will not be able to speak on air, as currently he is in an area with low internet reception, as he is currently on a Leaf Spring Army special assignment, and for this reason will not be able to speak on the stream tonight, but is present nevertheless. We do have a massive amount of breaking news from around the world, however, as we have been able to hear that Ukrainian armed forces have launched a successful drone strike into the area of the Izhevsk electromechanical missile facility, destroying the compound and causing significant damage. This facility was 900 miles inside the Russian Federation and away from Ukrainian borders, making this one of the longest-range Ukrainian drone attacks seen so far in the war. Outside of that, we have also been able to hear significant developments inside of the whole of the Russian Federation, as Russian Federation authorities through the FSB and other internal security services are now arresting and detaining Azerbaijani community officials throughout the Russian Federation, as it appears that Russian relations with the country of Azerbaijan are beginning to deteriorate, possibly due to the ongoing Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with Armenia and Azerbaijan. It has become incredibly clear and pressing at the moment that the Russian Federation may be jeopardizing the land corridor between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Russian Federation, as they continue to see that they are having deteriorating relations not only with the Azerbaijani communities in the Russian Federation, but with the government of Azerbaijan itself. Outside of that, we have also been able to see that the 72nd Group Army of the Eastern Theater Command inside of the People's Republic of China has been conducting military exercises today within the area of the South China Sea, once again signaling China's continued preparations and preparedness for an invasion of the island of Taiwan, eventually to happen, but exactly when, no one knows. We have also been able to hear in the Middle East that significant explosions have been reported in Tehran twice today over the course of several hours, as two different explosions, one in the southwestern quarter and one in the southeastern quarter of the city, went off hours apart from each other with absolutely no reason or cause for the explosions. It has been believed at this point that the state of Israel may have Mossad operatives on the ground, which are continuing to strike and destroy critical facilities throughout the capital city and other key areas of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as it does appear more and more pressingly clear as time continues to pass that the Islamic Republic of Iran is still under attack from some sort of an outside force, but it is not unknown as to who and to what aims they are achieving with these attacks. It may even be a partisan group at large. We have also been able to hear that the United States of America is continuing to conduct armed reconnaissance within the area of the Persian Gulf, as the Yemeni Houthis are also firing missiles into the state of Israel continuously. And we've also been able to hear that apparently the United States and Israel are still working to broker a ceasefire with the Hamas terrorist forces inside the Gaza Strip. We have also been able to hear inside the state of Ukraine today that the Ukrainian armed forces have continued to hold the lines against Russian Federation armed advances. And we've also been able to see that the Ukrainians are now extending into a anti-railroad drone campaign, targeting and destroying critical railroad infrastructure and trains with their drone forces, attempting to knock out the true life's blood of the Russian logistical forces for the Russian army inside of Ukraine. We have a massive load of news today. It's actually quite a significant amount, and we are going to be making sure to get through it with each and every single section of the news that we have tonight. And moving us on into our largest piece of news for the day, we are going to be moving into the Russian Federation and particularly the city of Izhevsk. The city of Izhevsk is a largely important city inside of the Russian Federation. Deep within Russia, as a matter of fact, near to the area of the Ural Mountains, the city of Izhevsk is an important manufacturer of firearms and different kinds of weapons for the Russian Federation. It was actually the city of Izhevsk which originally manufactured the first AK-47s and later AKMs and AK-74s that were produced by the Kalashnikov Company and used across the entirety of the Red Army in the Soviet Union. To this day, the Kalashnikov concern still operates a facility within the city of Izhevsk as a part of the Kalashnikov concern, producing AK-74s, AK-74Ms, and AK-12s among a wide variety of weaponry. It is not only that, but a Russian electromechanical ballistic missile factory is also found within the city of Izhevsk as well, as the majority of the Izhevsk local economy is actually from the arms industry itself, and without the arms industry, the city of Izhevsk would not have a significant economy, meaning that the city of Izhevsk is a arms monolith. We have been able to see that over the course of the day, significant attacks were recorded not on the Kalashnikov factory, but on the electromechanical factory within the city. This city is also, mind you all, 890 miles away from the Ukrainian border, meaning that this is nearly 900 miles away from the Ukrainian border and as far into the Russian Federation as you can practically get without reaching the Ural mountain range just 100 miles away and then officially reaching Asia. This is once again showing us that Ukrainian armed forces have the ability and the capacity to be able to strike deep inside the Russian Federation and cause significant damage throughout the entirety of the European area of Russia. We were able to get clips today showing the hits that were recorded onto the plant, which we can actually see in this first clip here, showing us the smoke that's rising and also the Ukrainian long-range drones continuing to strike and destroy the facility. We can actually see some pertinent geolocation here, as we were able to see that there's apparently apartment buildings nearby, and not only that, it is near to a lake. This actually locates this facility somewhere to around right here, or at least somewhere within this general area, which is incredibly close to the other major factories and manufactories within this region. Nevertheless, we also were able to get additional clips and footage as well, showing the citizens of Izhevsk watching as the explosions and attacks actually occurred, which we could see in this clip right here as well. We see the drone coming in and striking the facility as crowds of civilians run to cover. We can actually see the impact and explosion right there. The damage was actually quite significant. From what we were able to tell, the plant has largely been knocked out of action, as we were able to hear that the specific facility that was targeted was the Izhevsk Elektromechansky Zavod Kupol. I'm mispronouncing that massively. I'm not a master of the Russian language, but in English, it does stand for the Izhevsk Electromechanical Plant Kupol in Izhevsk. This facility, which you can actually see here on the specific geolocation, which will be showing the exact area of the plant, which you can see right here, was vital for the manufacture and production of cruise and ballistic missiles inside of the war effort. You can actually see some additional clips here showing the Liudi long-range drones flying in to make their mark and change the landscape of the city of Izhevsk and the local economy. You see more clips here, once again showing us the targeted attacks that were conducted by the Ukrainians over the course of the day. After this today, we were able to hear that Russian authorities announced that the city of Izhevsk was actually having a significant economic growth, and while the drones were shot down and some of the falling debris did cause some damage, the city of Izhevsk now officially has a booming economy, quite literally and figuratively. Beyond that, however, it is quite clear at this point that the Ukrainian armed forces are continuing to cause larger damage to the Russian Federation's critical war industries, which is something that a lot of people have not talked about or analyzed much over the course of the war. The Ukrainian long-range drone attacks have three large categories of targets that they usually go after and strike, usually in bulk, attempting to accumulate the damage within one specific economic sphere at a time. And the three major targets that the Ukrainian drone forces attack are logistics, war industry, and also significant economic monolithic industry, such as the petroleum or oil industry. It appears that at least recently, the Ukrainians have abandoned the petroleum industry as a priority target, and while some sporadic attacks have been conducted against Russian oil refineries, it's also a lot more common these days to see that the Ukrainian armed forces over the prior months have started to prioritize war industry itself and its ability to produce the furnishings of the conflict that the Russian army is using against the Ukrainians on the front lines. As a result of this, Ukrainian armed forces have been striking and destroying quite a significant number of ammunition facilities, ammunition dumps, any kind of ammunition factories, also aircraft inside of air bases, and other significant targets of this degree. It appears that the damage is starting to accumulate, as we are starting to hear that the Russian Federation is relying less so on ballistic and cruise missiles, and is starting to rely far more heavily on mass-produced drones. Those factories are easier to run, easier for the drones to be produced, and generally cheaper, meaning that the Russians get a higher cost effectiveness, even if the large majority of these drones, around 80 to 90% of them, are actually shot down by Ukrainian air defense inside of Ukraine. Even beyond that, those drones are able to cause more damage in turn at a cheaper price than the Russian ballistic missiles are. And for that reason, it appears that the Russian Federation, while seeing a lot of their ballistic missile factories go up in flames like they did today in Izhevsk, is also continuing to divest their resources into drone production instead, hoping eventually to have such a large number of drones that they'll be able to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses along most of the front and cause a major deal of damage. Nevertheless, the Ukrainians are attempting to stop that as well, but the factories that produce the drones so far have appeared to be a little bit more difficult to track down. And the only one that we've actually seen hit so far that we were able to confirm without a doubt was hit and destroyed within the area of Dubna. And it was actually this specific factory that you can see right up here. That is the only drone factory that we've been able to confirm was hit and destroyed outright by a Ukrainian drone attack, but we have not been able to record or confirm any other losses of drone factories in the Russian Federation so far. However, a lot of people are talking about the damage that was caused in the Izhevsk attack today, and we have also been able to hear that something else quite significant has happened inside the Russian Federation, and that happened within the area of Nizhny Novgorod, just 150 miles east of the city of Moscow. We were actually able to hear today that an Su-34 was in fact lost over the area of Nizhny Novgorod today. At least according to the information that we had coming out earlier in the morning, the Russians did lose an Su-34 as it crashed in the Nizhny Novgorod Oblast during a training flight. The takeoff was carried out by the Zaporizhzhia aircraft from the Zaporizhzhia airfield, and it's also reported that the pilot who managed to eject had since died. There are actually two pilots inside of an Su-34, a pilot and a co-pilot, and we have been able to hear some interdicting reports throughout the course of the day that it was either the fighter pilot or the co-pilot that ended up dying. We're not exactly sure which pilot or co-pilot died at the moment, as that information has still been incredibly unclear, but they did lose another Su-34 inside of the Nizhny Novgorod Oblast today, meaning that over the course of this single week, the Russian Federation has lost about 7 Su-34s, quite literally one per day. And we actually were able to confirm the loss of this Su-34, or at least the reason for the loss, in this clip right here, is this actually does show the doomed Su-34 attempting to land before its crash. The Su-34 apparently had some sort of a catastrophic landing gear failure. Either the hydraulic systems that were supposed to operate the landing gear were severed, or there was some sort of an issue with the actual landing gear assembly itself, and a critical linkage may have come apart, and it was not able to actually deploy its rear landing gear. We can actually see here in this clip, and this is incredibly interesting, that the front landing gear was able to successfully deploy, but it appears that the two rear landing gear were not able to deploy, and possibly the right landing gear halfway deployed before it also failed, along with the left side rear landing gear. The aircraft did attempt some maneuvers to try and get the landing gear in the rear to pretty much fall out due to gravity and then to lock in place, but it appears that they were not able to do that, and they decided to abandon the aircraft and eject after several failed attempts to try and force the landing gear out of the aircraft. As a result of this, one of the pilots did end up dying, apparently from the landing on the ground. It is understood that his chute may have not deployed successfully, and he pretty much ejected from the Su-34 and then fell to the ground like a stone and pretty much died on impact, or he hit the ground, suffered serious injuries, and then died later at a hospital or possibly receiving first aid. But here's the actual clip, once again showing us the Su-34 trying to force down its landing gear, but it does not appear that the left landing gear wants to come down at all, and the right landing gear is pretty much stuck in a halfway fixed position. The fault in this kind of a crash, or this sort of an incident, largely falls within the aviation maintenance crews specifically. The pilots are actually not to blame for this, and it is true that Russian pilots suffer a severe lack of actual training or any sort of flight hours on an annual basis, even so far in the conflict, but that is also true for the Russian ground crews as well, which also do not get an extensive or significant amount of training throughout most of their time inside of the service. This means that it is highly likely that Russian ground maintenance crews did not notice or maintain the hydraulic systems or linkages of the landing gear, and for this reason the Su-34 suffered a catastrophic failure of the rear landing gear systems, leading the plane to be pretty much unlandable and forcing the Russian pilots to have to eject out of the aircraft, leading to the loss of one of the pilots and the entirety of the aircraft. This is also showing us that the Russian Federation, while ramping up their military spending, at least to public numbers, to about $200 billion annually currently, is still at the very peak and are not able to put a significant amount of funding or any sort of ability to train their ground crews to keep the actual aircraft they have flying at a high operational level. Not only that, that's seen across the entirety of the Russian aviation industry, not only in the military, but civil aspects as well, as we've seen a large amount of Russian civilian airliners, specifically of the Tupolev and Ilyushin varieties, also suffering catastrophic failures throughout the course of the war or the conflict, and being forced to either land or being forced to crash with a significant loss of life. It is incredibly clear that as a result of this, the Russian Federation will continue to lose aircraft due to training accidents or lacks of maintenance, which we were able to see in this clip here, along with the loss of the significant amount of Su-34s at the Marinovka airfield in Volgograd, and also the loss of several other Su-34s in Ukraine, at least recently. But nevertheless, that brings us to a big question. Today, Russia did lose another Su-34 fighter jet in the Nizhny Novgorod Oblast during a training accident, and a lot of people are wondering, is the Russian Federation going to run out of jets? They have lost 7 in a singular week, and the Russian Federation's ability to manufacture new aircraft only extends to about 3 to 4 per month, meaning that so far they're already running a significant deficit of aircraft, at least over this month and the last month, where they lost about 34% of the Russian strategic bomber fleet. And it does appear that 41% are actually saying that the Russians are losing them far too fast. Others, 32%, are saying that it's starting to get fairly precarious, and the Russian Federation is starting to run out of a significant ability to maintain the size of their air force. 18% are actually saying that Russian losses are manageable, and 9% are saying that they're unsure and undecided. Nevertheless, a lot of people are having a different opinion on this, and I'd have to say that everyone's opinions on this are actually fairly decent. But nevertheless, I would have to agree with the 41% that the Russian Federation is losing them too fast, and it's not just a precarious situation, it is a hemorrhaging at this point in the Russian Air Force. The Russian Federation only has an ability to largely manufacture a limited number of aircraft in peacetime, and it's not a wildly large amount. Many people always think of the Russian and Chinese war industries as something akin to the United States, where we're able to produce hundreds or thousands of aircraft in a couple of years span in batches, and companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and so on. The reality of the fact is that the Russian Federation more so has a cottage industry style aviation industry, and are only able to produce a limited number of airframes per month, and most of those are based off of the Sukhoi Su-27 style, or the Su-27 airframe seen here, much like the Su-34. This is pretty much the only modern manufactured aircraft. Every other aircraft is fabricated, or it is a refit or modification of an older airframe. For example, the Tu-160. Not a single Tu-160 from what we know has been built in the modern day from scratch. Pretty much all of them have been rebuilds, or they have been attempted refurbishments of older airframes that have been sitting out idle for decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We've also seen that very same thing with the Tu-22 M3s, which are the strategic bombers of the Russian Federation, of a smaller variety than the Tu-160. These have also had to be refit or rebuilt from older decaying airframes that have been sitting out for decades. Every single aircraft, even down to the MiG-29, has not seen any significant rebuilds or even a large attempt at massive assembly processes. The MiG-29 has actually been modified to attempt to prolong its service life into the MiG-29 SMT, which I'll actually show y'all a picture of right here. This is your average MiG-29. I believe this would be the MiG-29 F-13. This is the modern Russian Federation MiG-29, the MiG-29 SMT. The hump inside of the rear of the fuselage actually allows for the addition of several other computer systems and a larger fuel tank, and the MiG-29 is actually the only aircraft in Russian and Ukrainian service that is actually of Soviet design that can mount an external fuel tank between the two air inlets. These aircrafts are also not being produced brand new. The MiG-29 SMTs are a rebuild of older MiG-29 variants, attempting to just make them more modern and make them last a little bit longer in modern warfare. The fact of the matter is that outside of any Su-27 airframe, like the Su-34s, any other aircraft in the Russian Federation are practically irreplaceable at this point. They just simply cannot produce them. They don't have the ability nor the funds. And also, Russian war industries do not have that kind of reserve funding to be able to open up those new kinds of assembly lines or manufacturing abilities. And not only that, to be able to import enough vital computer systems and rare metals that have already been refined to be able to produce these aircraft at larger scales. This means that the Russian aviation forces are actually hemorrhaging at this point, because if we were to take the 4 airframes produced every single month, it is approximated that only 1 or 2 of those are Su-34s. The other 2 would most likely be an Su-30SM or an Su-35, and that's still a little bit sketchy. It could just be 2 Su-30SMs or 2 Su-35s a month, but they generally produce 2 fighter bomber Su-34s and 2 air superiority Su-35s or Su-30SM style Su-27 airframes per month. And this means that with the kind of losses they're taking currently, there is no way that this is going to end up being good for the Russian Federation, and they are now hemorrhaging a vital supply of aircraft that they will no longer be able to replace. And it appears that the Russian Federation is also going to be running into some greater issues trying to get resupplies, as there is only one way that the Russian Federation is able to get any kind of resupply, at least within the area of Europe, and that is through Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is the only link of a neutral country between Russian Federation and the outside world by land. No European country allows over-the-border trade with the Russian Federation any longer, whether it be Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, or Norway. All of them have cut access to the borders with the Russian Federation, and land trade is no longer possible. Azerbaijan is the only border crossing that the Russians have, technically within Europe, it's kind of in Asia, that was allowing them to have access to any kind of refined metals, computer components, or anything else from the outside world that would allow for them to continue their manufacturing. And it appears that that is also beginning to wane, and time is running out for them down there. We have been able to hear that the Russian Federation apparently is starting to go around and gather up key Azerbaijani community officials within the Russian Federation and arrest them. This is something that is going to be causing significant diplomatic issues with the Republic of Azerbaijan, as it's becoming more and more clear that the Russian Federation has some sort of a specific vendetta against the Azerbaijani communities living within the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, none of these videos are loading on Twitter currently, but it is showing the arrest of Igor Kartovic and Yevgeny Belousov for apparently spying against the Russian FSB. We have been able to hear that at least at the moment, the Russian Federation and Azerbaijan are having a little bit of a spat. And to try and technically explain what's going on at the moment, I'll try my best. It's a little bit of a complicated situation, and it's one that actually happened while we were off air yesterday. Inside of Baku, the Azerbaijani internal security services actually found that the Russian Federation was running an FSB spy ring inside of Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, and were possibly attempting an overthrow of the Azerbaijani government, or to try and create some sort of destabilizing governmental situation in the country that would force the Azerbaijani government, the central one, to lean more heavily onto the Russian Federation for their security. And for this reason, this would pretty much ensure that the Azerbaijanis were a permanent land corridor in between Russia and the greater outside world. The Azerbaijanis went forward and arrested these people for spying for the FSB. And as a result of this, the Russian Federation has now started to conduct reprisals by just finding any Azerbaijani community leaders and arresting them throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation. Not only did that happen in Yekaterinburg today, it also happened in the city of Voronezh, only about 200 miles away from the Ukrainian border, where we were also able to see Yusuf Kalilov, a co-owner of Izhevsk market, was detained. He is a head of the Azerbaijan Ural organization, who also is a significant community leader of the Azerbaijani people living inside of the Russian Federation. And here's the clip right here. We can see the FSB out en masse conducting the arrest and taking the leader of this Azerbaijani community into custody. This is causing a massive diplomatic spat between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and what's even more interesting is that the Russian Federation has actually fumbled the diplomatic situation inside of the Caucasus region for quite some time. Recently, the Nagorno-Karabakh War has been a bit of a heated subject within the area of the two countries of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And since 2020, the second and third Nagorno-Karabakh wars have been fought and largely won by Azerbaijan with support of the Russian Federation. With this in mind, one thing that's a little bit interesting to note is that the country that Russia teamed up with Azerbaijan with to beat was actually the very member of the CSTO that the Russians technically have a defensive obligation to. And let me go show you all that really quickly. The CSTO is Russia's attempted equivalent of NATO. And if you look at this map right here, you will actually see that Armenia is the only member state in the Caucasus Mountain regions of the CSTO. And at least last year, about a year and a half ago, Armenia officially ratified their withdrawal from the Collective Security Treaty Organization, meaning that they are no longer a member. And for that reason, because Russia teamed up with Azerbaijan to beat the Armenians and keep Azerbaijan within Russia's good graces, that way they have a land corridor to the outside world to trade with, they pretty much threw Armenia to the wolves, and they no longer have any military ally within the Caucasus. Now, with the actions that are being conducted by the Russian Federation today in reprisal of the FSB agents being arrested in Azerbaijan, they are also turning the Azerbaijanis against them, meaning that the Russian Federation has no more allies left within Georgia, Armenia, or Azerbaijan, and all of those countries could largely be considered unfriendly or openly hostile to Russian interests within the region. This is a massive diplomatic mishandling of the area, and it's most likely going to result in the Russian Federation losing any kind of significant land corridor access to the greater outside world, either through Iran or the Republic of Turkey, where trade could still lightly be conducted, at least at the time. This also means that the Russian Federation, as far as trade, will be relying on the Trans-Siberian Railway a lot more as the days continue and months continue to pass, as they will have to source all of their supplies from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea or from the People's Republic of China, and transport all of that freight across the Russian Federation through thousands of miles into Western Russia, where most of the major industrial centers are. This is going to end up costing the Russian Federation quite dearly in the long run, and this is also going to make it a lot more expensive for them to produce weapon systems because the cost of transport of these vital electronics and components is going to be far greater because of the amount of distance it's having to travel overland to make it into the area of Western Russia. This is going to be an absolutely massive pitfall for the Russians. I cannot even exaggerate that enough, and it is not going to end up boding them too well. We also got to see inside of Russia that there has been a significant amount of damage caused to an oil depot in the Rostov region, as we were able to see here, satellite picture confirming that multiple silos were burned out in a prior Ukrainian drone attack, also showing that they have less available fuel, at least within that specific area. Moving on from this, however, and out of the Russian Federation for just a moment, and segueing us into the Middle East, we have also been able to see some significant developments within the area of the South China Sea, or more so revolving around the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, and that was in the form of military exercises that were conducted today within the South China Sea. This is actually footage that was published by the People's Liberation Army in China, and this is showing the 72nd Group Army Amphibious Brigade, or one of their amphibious brigades, conducting amphibious exercises within the area of the South China Sea. If many of y'all do not know the Chinese military structure, I'll actually give y'all a little bit of a crash course in the moment as to why this is significant and something a little bit important to pay attention to. The People's Republic of China is divided into 5 theater commands, or TCs for short. These theater commands are designed with specific abilities or specific attentions to strategic imperatives of the Chinese Communist Party, which is the ruling party inside of China. Out of these 5, there are 2 that are incredibly important to us here in the Western world. That would be the Eastern Theater Command, headquartered out of Nanjing, and the Southern Theater Command, based out of, I believe, it is Shenzhen, if I'm correct. I'll have to make sure to get a correction on that later if it's wrong. Nevertheless, the Eastern Theater Command is the most important one out of the 2 at the moment, as the Southern Theater Command directly threatens the South China Sea, but the Eastern Theater Command's entire reason for existence is a preparation for an eventual invasion of the Republic of China, also called the island of Taiwan by many. The 72nd Group Army is one of the armies that falls under the Eastern TC's Theater of Command, and this 72nd Group Army is one of the 3 armies within that Theater of Command, or largely Command Theater, or Theater Command. That army, the 72nd Group Army, is specifically designed for amphibious landing operations and an invasion of the island of Taiwan. It is one of the few group armies in all of China that has 2 amphibious brigades within its force composition, meaning that this military exercise is once again training and preparation by the Chinese for an eventual amphibious landing of the island of Taiwan, which we can see in this clip right here. We can see them, of course, conducting their waiting operations as they attempt to simulate an amphibious landing supported by gunfire by the amphibious landing craft, or largely the amphibious APCs and IFVs, that also would be supported by the Chinese Air Force and the People's Liberation Army Navy in an actual ground invasion. We can also see them bringing in hovercraft, which are also bringing in additional supplies, or at least simulated to bring in additional supplies, and a great deal of camera work, once again showing how impressive and great the 72nd Group Army is, and how its amphibious landing abilities have greatly improved over prior years. This is something to pay particular attention to, because it is once again showing us that the People's Republic of China is continuing to hone and enhance their abilities to not only threaten the South China Sea, but more importantly to threaten the island of Taiwan. Everyone in the world knows that the island of Taiwan is one of the most significant defensive structures or defensive features that we have within the area of the Eastern Pacific. The United States of America, since the early 2010s under President Obama, has largely put up forward an idea of island containment, creating a literal physical barrier between China and the outside world. The countries that are a part of that physical barrier are South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and possibly in the future, Indonesia, as Indonesia also has direct control over the Strait of Malacca and other significant straits that could be used in the future by the Chinese to slip submarines through and get them into the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean and start to cause some significant issues. Indo-PACOM Command, which is the U.S. command specifically responsible for this area, has continued to try and bolster our force presence in the region, building new air bases inside the Philippines, and also along the Japanese island chain, which reaches all the way from Kyushu Island, one of the largest islands within the southern Japanese island chain, and all the way down through Okinawa and all the way to the small island of Yonaguni, which is literally just a couple of dozen miles off the coast of Taiwan. If the United States is able to keep this island containment chain intact into the future, it is highly likely that the U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Forces could stop any further Chinese breakout into the Pacific Ocean, either by the People's Liberation Army Navy surface vessel forces or by their submarine forces. If we fail in that attempt, the Chinese will be able to conduct unrestricted submarine warfare in the Pacific as well as the Indian Ocean, causing massive damage to global shipping lanes and also cutting supply lines that are vital for the function of the U.S. military and also the European nations inside of Europe. Letting the Chinese break out into the Pacific or the Indian Ocean is an absolutely unacceptable solution. And if the Chinese ever take the island of Taiwan, they would be able to base or build submarine pens and bases on the eastern area of the island of Taiwan, pretty much meaning that our island containment chain ceases to exist from that point forward. There is also another important economic concern at the moment, that TSMC, a major semiconductor producer that supplies most semiconductors around the world, is based out of Taiwan. And if the island of Taiwan falls and TSMC is taken intact by the Chinese, the nation of China, a communist country, a part of an enemy sphere to the United States and the Western world, and the leader of that sphere, will now have direct access over all semiconductor production in the entirety of the world for the large part, save for the smaller semiconductor manufacturers elsewhere. TSMC is currently attempting to move their productions into the United States, but still, that will not be happening at least for the next 2 to 3 years. And a lot of people are wondering, would that be enough time? And a lot of people are also speaking about how long it will be until the Chinese actually try and spring forward this invasion of the island of Taiwan. And a lot of people are saying, 56% are actually saying that it'll happen within a year or two. Others are saying that they're unsure and undecided, and some are saying that it'll happen in months. A very small amount are saying that it'll happen when the Ukraine war ends. And as far as we can tell, at least off of current predicted timetables, there are two prevailing ones at the moment. One is that it will happen in 1 to 2 years. The other is that it's going to be happening in the late 2020s or the early 2030s, specifically from 2028 to 2032. That was the general original expected timetable for an amphibious landing by China on the Taiwan and an attempted takeover of the island. But considering the rapid buildup of Chinese naval abilities recently, along with the funnies that the Chinese have been producing, which are pretty much these special sort of contraptions that are made specifically for beach landings on Taiwan, it is much more pressingly so, along with the 56%, that the invasion of Taiwan's timetable is being rapidly accelerated at the moment and may actually happen in the later part of 2026 or sometime in the year 2027. The Chinese do not have the ability right now to successfully invade the island and take it. I want to make that a little bit clear. According to all the information we have, the Chinese Navy is just not large enough to be able to sustain or function a significant landing force on the island. And that is pretty much the one prohibiting factor that is stopping the Chinese from beginning the invasion right now. This is something that we'll most likely be seeing here in the future, as we will be continuing to wait and see when it happens, but I'd also have to be with the 56% that an invasion of Taiwan is highly likely and will most likely be happening within a year or two from now. Outside of that, though, and moving on into the Middle East, we've also been able to hear of some more interesting developments, at least within this area as well, as we've been able to hear that inside of the city of Tehran, the capital of Iran, about a week after the actual hostile actions between Israel and Iran ceased, there are still major explosions ripping through the city of Tehran. And specifically, the first explosion that we were able to hear of was within the area of southeastern Tehran. Apparently, this was near to a military base in Shahar Array, which may have actually suffered a direct explosion within the facility. We cannot confirm that at the moment, as geolocation has not proved fruitful in getting an exact location on the explosion, but it was incredibly close to the Shahar Array military base within southeastern Tehran. It is something to note that this explosion has come in the middle of a supposed time of peace and a supposed ceasefire that has lasted for about a week now. And we also were able to see a second explosion inside of Tehran within its southwestern area near to the Banashet Park inside of Tehran. Hopefully this video will load. We're having an issue today with Twitter for some reason, and it doesn't appear that video will be loading either. Oh, hopefully Twitter will eventually work someday, but there was a second explosion and smoke rising from a warehouse inside of an industrial park within southwestern Tehran. 2 explosions within a 24-hour period. And I do have to remind you all that the Israeli Air Force is not conducting any air activities, neither is the U.S. Air Force, and also there has been an existent ceasefire by the United States and Israel with the Iranians for about a week now. We do not know who's causing the explosions or why they are generally happening. It is an incredibly interesting phenomenon, that I will largely say, and it also does appear that at the moment, there are some sort of groups or actions that are being taken within the Islamic Republic of Iran that is attempting to target and destroy their significant facilities within the capital city. It could highly likely be that of Mossad, or it could be other operatives. It could also be groups that are just openly hostile against the Iranian government that are taking it upon themselves to conduct partisan activities throughout the Islamic Republic of Iran as well. It's just incredibly hard to tell at the moment who exactly is doing what within the region. We have also been able to hear, outside of that, however, that a new NOTAM has been issued by the Iranians that reads, the restriction of international flights to entry permits and domestic flights to special flights has been extended again until July 9th. And we were able to see that NOTAM once again being issued right here. This may possibly be suggesting that the Islamic Republic of Iran has something up its sleeve and will be conducting some further actions in the future. That is also once again happening while weird, unprecedented sorts of explosions are happening within northern Iraq. Northern Iraq is generally an unstable place. There's a lot always going on up there, and it's generally considered the Wild West of Iran, of Iraq currently. But we were able to hear of significant explosions that occurred near the Kirkuk airport, which we were able to see in this clip here as well. Once again, we do not know who caused the explosions, but we were able to hear from Phytux Network, an amazing provider of open source intelligence, that there were explosions and damage around the Kirkuk airport from some explosions. One person reportedly died in the blast as well, once again adding to what exactly happened, it being a mystery. When you see the fires breaking out on the tarmac of the airport right there, and it is once again showing us that there are a string, an actual rash of unexpected explosions that are happening within that area of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Even more still, we also were able to hear that the United States of America is continuing to conduct intelligence gathering operations against the Iranians, as a U.S. Navy MQ-4C Triton was once again conducting aerial surveillance patterns within the area of the Persian Gulf, just north of the nation or city-state of Qatar. It does appear that the United States is still trying to gather more information, at least at the moment, on Iranian operations inside their country and potential damage that was caused to the nuclear facilities throughout the Islamic Republic of Iran, as results have proven inconclusive at the moment, and we really don't know what exactly happened in the country, because we are starting to hear a load of conflicting reports, at least for now, as to the condition of the Iranian nuclear facilities and whether or not the United States and Israel are going to have to restart a bombing campaign against the Iranians to actually knock them out once and for all. We were able to also hear that the Yemeni Houthis have taken it upon themselves to fire more ballistic missiles at the state of Israel, as we were able to see that the Yemeni Houthis did fire another ballistic missile, and the Israelis did conduct a ballistic missile exo-atmospheric interception over the skies of Israel, which we were able to see in this clip right here.
فلت هيو فلت بالاحشاد وجمعياتهم.
The interception right there. And that's the end of that clip. We also have additional clips from Israel actually showing the specific moment of the interception, which we could see right here. When you see the missile going in, hitting it, and successfully intercepting it. We could also see as well, outside of that, that the state of Israel has also been stating that there were air raid alerts as a result of this. It does appear that this missile was heading towards the southern area of Tel Aviv, most likely around the area of Ashdod, and also in between Jerusalem as well. We were also able to hear on top of that that the United States and Israel are possibly attempting to try and make a ceasefire with Hamas, as we were able to hear a statement from the president today, which read as followed. My representatives had a long and productive meeting with the Israelis today on Gaza. Israel has agreed to the necessary conditions to finalize the 60-day ceasefire, during which time we will work with all parties to end the war. The Qataris and Egyptians, who have worked very hard to help bring peace, will deliver this final proposal. I hope for the good of the Middle East that Hamas takes this deal, because it will not get better, it will only get worse. And that was the statement from the president today regarding the issue of a ceasefire with Hamas. This is also at the time, to put this out there, that there are still several dozen hostages that have been unaccounted for and have possibly been killed by Hamas in a captivity since the original raid was conducted by Hamas into Israel on October 7th of 2023, which resulted in the death of 1,500 Israelis and foreigners that were inside of Israel, along with hundreds more being taken hostage. Nevertheless, it does appear that the United States of America is attempting to do the age-old, not really tried and true or necessarily a win-win tactic, which is to negotiate with terrorists. Because I'm pretty sure that we negotiated with the Houthis, and that ceasefire didn't even last an hour before they started firing at U.S. carrier strike groups that were still within the area. Nevertheless, though, a lot of people are talking about those major explosions that we were speaking of just a little moment ago inside of Tehran. As more major explosions are happening in Tehran, correction everyone, let me make sure to read that correctly. More major explosions are happening in Tehran, Iran, near missile sites, and a lot of people wondering, is Israel softening Iran? And it does appear that many have different opinions, but it appears that there's a prevailing group of 52% that say Israel is certainly softening up the Iranians. There is another 25% that are saying that it could be Iranian rebels. Some others are saying that the explosions are definitely unusual, but they don't really know what they are, and 11% are saying that they're unsure and undecided. It is quite clear, however, at the moment that many people are believing that this is some sort of a preparatory action by the state of Israel against the Iranians in preparation for the future airstrikes that are to be conducted. The Islamic Republic of Iran has made it quite clear that they are going to be continuing their attempts to nuclearize their country and to create weapons of mass destruction that not only will target the Israelis, but would also target the United States of America in the future, as they're also working simultaneously on a rocketry program that would be able to eventually yield ICBMs with enough range to reach the United States. The Israelis appear to already be working in silent with the Mossad to target and destroy a significant amount of these facilities on the ground throughout Tehran. There is a small likelihood, however, that it could be groups attempting to overthrow the Iranian government on their own, and they're attempting to conduct partisan activities that will end up posing enough damage to the Iranians' central military structures in the capital that an uprising may be successful. It just doesn't appear at the moment, however, that the Islamic Republic of Iran will get a clear answer, or we will get a clear answer as to who. But if we had to take a general shot in the dark and a decent guess, I would say that in my opinion, it appears to be the Islamic Republic of Iran is under attack by Mossad agents, and they are attempting to target and destroy significant structures that are within their reach in the meantime while the ceasefire persists. But it doesn't appear that this ceasefire will be lasting for too long. But moving on from that and outside of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is time for us to start moving on into the actual Ukraine war news. And we've been moving at a pretty decent clip tonight. We've gotten into about an hour of news coverage, and right now, there are 14,000 people here live watching the stream. Before we move on into the Ukraine war news coverage, I do have to thank all of y'all so much once again for watching and enjoying this so far, because we put in a great deal of effort every single day to make sure to get you all the news. I do know that this format is not exactly normal, as usually it is a host and co-host format, where I usually do the monologuing, and then Matthew comes in and he adds in a little bit extra. Unfortunately, Matthew is not here tonight to be able to add in that little bit extra. He technically is here, but he's not able to speak on the air. He is still in the chat and moderating. He still has the power of the ban hammer and is also gathering up super chats and live chats into the spreadsheet for me to read, but he has not been able to be on air tonight, and I'm sure that many people have noticed that, and his presence is missed greatly, and so hopefully we'll be able to see that Enforcer Matt will be back on air soon, because he is on special assignment outside of the LSA HQ elsewhere in the world. Where exactly, we can't say until he's back, but one thing I can tell y'all is that he's having an absolute blast, and it's an incredibly interesting time out there. Nevertheless, we are going to make sure to throw in that little bit extra right here, because before we move on into the Ukraine war segment, we are going to make sure to answer some big questions questions, or at least a couple of questions before we get on into the Ukraine war news. And moving us on in, we have been able to see that a massive $100 super chat was thrown in by Hawk. Hey, and a huge thanks to Hawk for throwing in the $100 support. If it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and while you didn't throw in a comment, the support is massively appreciative, and folks like you help this channel to keep on running and help us to make this thing possible. I've got to thank everyone who does go out of their way to support this channel, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible. This channel is pretty much crowdfunded by the viewers themselves. We don't really have any ads, and we don't really have any sponsors. We do have ads on our short war videos, but that's generally because YouTube won't push those unless we turn the ads on. So we really don't have a choice with that. But on live streams, we never run ads, and we don't have sponsors. And the folks who are directly supporting this channel tonight, like Hawk with their massive support, make this channel a reality, not only for Enforcer Matt and me, but for all of y'all to be watching right now. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again for the support, Hawk, and helping this channel to keep on running, because while you didn't throw in a comment with that support, your support is helping us to make a million comments here live on air. So massive thanks to you so much once again. And moving us on into the next one, we have a $150 super chat from BC Skyman, a channel legend and an old guard. And I got to thank you so much for that amazing and impressive support, BC Skyman. BC Skyman didn't throw in any comments, at least with all of his $50 super chats, but we are absolutely massively appreciative. He did throw in super stickers, however, of the Shiba Inu in samurai armor holding sparklers, as well as a person jumping around inside of a heart-shaped a window, I believe, and also another fella, a pair, riding on a rocket into the distance. I believe that's supposed to be an artistic representation of Kim Jong-un. But nevertheless, I do have to thank BC Skyman for the absolutely massive support and the other $50 super chat that BC Skyman just threw in, totaling $200 in support from BC Skyman tonight. We've got to thank you incredibly once again for that unbelievable, insanely massive support, because if it wasn't for folks like you, BC Skyman, who have been around for years now, we simply would not have been able to make this channel possible and keep this thing running. So massive thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we would have never been able to make this channel possible, and we never would have been able to keep it running. So massive thanks to you greatly once again. And with that, we are going to be moving on into our last question of the segment, which is a $50 super chat that goes to Wubba. And Wubba said, took a couple of nights off to go see both Metallica concerts in Denver. Hope you guys didn't run out of coffee. And I hope you had a fun time listening to those Metallica concerts in Denver. I heard that they were very metallic and were generally quite good. So hopefully they were amazingly good concerts. Nevertheless, we did not run out of coffee. As a matter of fact, we have had more coffee than we could have ever wanted. It's been an amazing time, as a matter of fact, and the news has been quite good, at least recently. And I got to thank you incredibly for also being an old guard and a channel legend, Wubba, and throwing in that $50 super chat to once again stock up on the coffee fund to keep the show running. I actually had to make an emergency coffee run right before the stream to be able to go get some and make sure to keep this whole show on air and running, because if I do not have coffee, I cannot talk. And especially considering that we found out literally an hour before the show that Matthew wouldn't be able to talk tonight because his Wi-Fi where he's at is about as bad as the Russians' internet connection on the front lines in Ukraine. We ended up not being able to have a host-co-host sort of a setup, and I have to monologue literally endlessly tonight for the entirety of the show. So not only is that a little bit of a strain, because having a little bit of a breather in the talking segments does help out massively with stopping voice fatigue, at least quickly, we also have to make sure to keep this thing going and decaffeinated enough to be able to do that. And thank God that we are. I do have to also give a huge thanks to Enforcer Matt, though, because he's still handling a lot of the behind-the-scenes stream stuff that he would do on a normal night. The only thing he isn't able to do tonight, unfortunately, is talk. At all, because the Wi-Fi was terrible. Y'all should have heard it before we got on stream, as a matter of fact, because we were trying it out, and I was like, so, can you hear me, Matthew? It took him 2 minutes to be able to respond, at least on my end, so I guess it took him a minute to hear it, and then a minute for the message to get back, and it came through like Robo-Mad. It was like, I was like, dude, this is not going to work, man. It's not going to work at all. This is a loss. So, then we came up with the idea, he will just run everything behind the scenes, but he won't talk on air, because no one will be able to understand it, and it also would take forever for him to hear what I'm saying and then be able to say anything in response. So the whole thing would be thrown out of sync for the large part, unfortunately. Hopefully that issue can be fixed. I'm not sure if it will be. This might be an issue that we have until he's able to return, which will be hopefully soon, within a couple of days. Well, we know exactly when he's returning. It's going to be soon, within a couple of days. But beyond that, we are absolutely absolutely happy to have all of y'all here tonight, and I got to give you a huge thanks to you so much once again for the support, Wubba, because folks like you and everyone else who supports this channel helps this thing to keep running and helps us to be able to cover the news for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people a month. And so, a massive thanks to you so much once again, and we are going to be moving on into the rest of our news for the night. And we have been able to hear a lot of interesting news that has been coming out of the Ukraine war, but also some unfortunate news as well, as we were able to confirm that the United States Department of Defense today has stopped all arms shipments of air defense missiles and precision munitions to Ukraine over concerns that the United States weapons stockpiles are too low. And that is a fairly interesting sort of a development to hear. We have generally not heard that, at least recently, and it does appear that the United States Department of Defense has now made the unilateral decision, at least at the moment, to once again stop arms shipments to the state of Ukraine. This is not the first time that this has happened. This actually happened just a couple of hours, or really a day or two, into the opening of the new administration, as it became incredibly clear that the Secretary of Defense sometimes likes to operate outside of his own purview, and likes to make actions that sometimes are not really in the best interest of the United States or the Department of the President of the United States, which put him into the position. From what we are able to generally understand, it does seem that the Department of Defense is trying to make the claim that the United States of America does not have the significant arms production industries necessary to be able to replenish our stockpiles at home and also replenish the state of Ukraine stockpiles with older, aging munitions. I also want to make it quite incredibly clear that the congressional drawdowns that have been approved of equipment so far to the state of Ukraine have been entirely from older equipment that is soon to be retired or decommissioned due to its age, and it is getting its second life inside of the state of Ukraine. It's not being given brand new. So the idea that the United States is running out of critical munitions is one that's a little bit interesting, because we've already seen that that necessarily isn't the case, because we're giving older munitions that are to be retired and replaced anyways. We're not giving them anything new. So it does seem that a lot of people are a little bit unhappy with this action, and I would also have to generally say that I'm a little bit unhappy with it as well. I have a feeling that if I was to take a shot in the dark at this is once again the Secretary of Defense operating on his own without the approval of the President. The Secretary of Defense has generally had some sort of a bone to pick with the state of Ukraine since he's been the Secretary of Defense. I have no idea or the reason as to why, because he certainly didn't have any problem dropping bombs on Iran or Yemen, but when it comes to us giving bombs for the Ukrainians to drop on the Russians, then for some reason we're running a little bit short. It just doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense. Not only that, that is another interesting thing to put out, is that we are currently replacing all the munitions that we're giving to Ukraine. The munitions that we have right now are not going to be around for long. They are going one way or the other. We're either retiring them and destroying them out in the desert, or we're retiring them and giving them over to Ukraine. It's one of the two. It's something that is not really up for debate. The munitions are going to be gone. It's just a question of how. So to try and make the point to say that we're running out of munitions that we're already getting rid of, it sounds like a bunch of malarkey to me, and I'm not really believing that sort of a claim. And if that's also the case, I think that it should be a greater argument that funding for arms industry should be increased, and the amount of annual production should start to rapidly skyrocket. Because if we're saying in the NATO conference in Brussels through the President that there's a significant belief by everyone, including the United States, that the Russians could expand the war into Europe, wouldn't it make a lot of sense for our war industry to already generally be pre-mobilized, just as a matter of fact, to prepare for that invasion, and also to support the state of Ukraine to keep the Russians tied up in Ukraine? That seems like it would make a lot more sense to me than trying to just drag around and figure out how to explain away not giving weaponry to Ukraine. It just does not make any sense to me at all. But beyond that, we have been able to hear that the state of Ukraine is still doing generally well on the front lines and has been doing a great deal of good so far on the front. We do not have a large amount of frontline videos and clips today. Just to quickly put this out there for all of y'all, I have been trying to cut down on the amount of redundant clips that we have of drone attacks being conducted by Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian forces conduct a large amount of drone attacks every day, and a lot of that video footage is published online. However, the amount of analysis that we generally can extrapolate out of any one of those given videos is fairly low, to be entirely honest with y'all. And also on top of that, the amount of analysis that we can give is also quite low as well. And so to try and make sure that the quality of our coverage is high and also not extremely redundant on a day-to-day basis, we're making sure to include only rarer amounts of footage that actually would be more pertinent to the analysis of what the frontline situation is looking like. So with that in mind, we are going to be moving behind the lines into occupied Ukraine to speak about what we have heard has been happening back here. We were able to hear that an S-300 and S-400 system were targeted overnight inside of Ukraine. We were not able to confirm the exact location, but we were able to confirm that there was a fire being reported on the firm satellite, and we could see this S-300 radar battery and also air defense system being filmed earlier in the day. We can also see here the firm satellite showing where the battery appeared to have been, and it does appear that it was on fire at the time. And we can also see that that was actually incredibly close to the Kerch Strait. It's actually up near the piss puddle. And I know a lot of people are like, well, you've never called it the piss puddle. I've never called it the piss puddle, but this is my name for this thing. It looks like piss. It's yellow like piss. I don't know what's in it. I would assume it's toxic. But the air defense battery is somewhere around right here. Well, actually, it's somewhere around right here, as a matter of fact. That's generally where it was being filmed. So it appears that the S-300 air defense battery, which we could call battery piss puddle, has been targeted and destroyed not too far away from the Kerch Bridge itself. This S-300 and S-400 system is actually a part of the greater Kerch Bridge air defense perimeter, and it does appear that the Ukrainians are attempting to target and destroy the air defense batteries that are within that area and cause a significant amount of damage to them. If this is a successful operation and the radar systems were destroyed for this S-300 or S-400 air defense system, it is highly likely that the Ukrainians may be opening up the bridge to further air attacks, at least here within the near future, and may also be eyeballing another round of attacks onto the Kerch Bridge that may damage or destroy it entirely, or at least knock it out for a long time until repairs can be effected. They'll be able to bring the bridge back up into an operational status, but that would most likely take months of repairs, like we've seen in the last successful attacks, which were conducted several years ago. Nevertheless, we were also able to hear of larger developments happening throughout the area of southern Ukraine still. And we've also been able to see that the Ukrainian armed forces appear to be finally conducting a wave of strategies or tactics that are incredibly important to conduct against the Russian army. The Russian army is an interesting one, at least in terms of how it's supplied. The Russian armed forces is the only country in the world that still primarily supplies itself off of railheads. Railheads are railway stations or cargo terminals that are used by trains that carry a great deal of military supplies, equipment, and personnel to a specific point near to the front line, usually about 50 to 100 miles away, and then that equipment makes its final jaunt to the front lines on the back of trucks. Most countries around the world have largely moved away from that in an actual conventional war. The United States of America still relies heavily on its railroads for mobilization and wartime activities, as it is the only efficient way to move mass amounts of armor and supplies over land rapidly at an incredibly cheap rate. However, the United States of America does not use railheads for overseas combat or combat outside of its domestic borders. The United States of America uses airlifts and also ground truck transports for that sort of supply line. It is a lot more expensive, but a lot more rapid and able to adjust to the actual combat situation on the ground, which is wildly efficient and necessary in the modern age. On the other hand, the Russians are not that kind of a country. They are actually the only one left in the world that has railroad brigades that their specific purpose and function is to run railroads and trains for the Russian army to be able to bring their supplies to the front, meaning that the Russian army actually has a supply Achilles heel: the railroads. And the railroads are actually a little bit more difficult to target and destroy than one would think. Multiple units, or not really multiple units, but diesel-electric locomotives are pretty hard to destroy. You can hit them and you can damage them, but they can be rebuilt within about a month, and they can be put right back out on the railroads. There are a lot of diesel-electric locomotives that pretty much almost destroy themselves and then are rebuilt back into an operational status and then put back out on the main here in America quite frequently. Not only that, but destroying the rail bed of these trains is also a little bit more difficult. But one thing is an Achilles heel: the bridges and also the main lines themselves, at least as a concept. If you knock out a multiple unit or a train on a main line, it will eventually be repaired and it will eventually be removed. But one thing that it will not do, at least in a benefit for the short term, is clear out that main line. A train just can't go around another one. It has to wait for the main line to be cleared for it to be able to move forward, at least on a one-track main. And if that train is knocked out, it is knocking out an entire main line until it is moved. And that's if it ever can be moved. If the Ukrainians can keep a destroyed train in place, then that means that main line is obstructed until the end of the war. And we were able to see within southern Zaporizhzhia, at least here recently, that the Ukrainians have done just that. They were able to stop and knock out a Russian train on a main line heading through the Zaporizhzhia region, and it appears that main line has now been knocked out, effective permanently, at least for now. We haven't seen the Russians conduct a rail recovery effort or attempt to recover the knocked out train, and also on top of that, they would have to take probably some time. If they want to not sacrifice a great deal of diesel-electric locomotives trying to grab this whole train, they'll most likely have to uncouple cuts of cars or the locomotives pieces at a time and then take them out. But we can see here, at least in this clip, the main line and the locomotive that was soon to pass. There's the main line. We can actually see here that they did knock out a specific section of the roadbed that appears to have possibly been done by partisan activity. And we can see here that it appears that the train itself actually ran over that gap and either derailed or stopped. That's the end of the clip, but it does appear that it was a successful attack by the Ukrainians that was able to knock out a train. And we can see that once again right here, and we can see the geolocation that was done incredibly well by the folks over in Ukraine War Video Report, or Quebecois, man, which was able to exactly point out where it was and where it ended up being derailed. This will keep this main line inhabited for the entire time that train is stuck there until it can be moved. And that means that entire main line through southern Ukraine and is pretty much impassable or unusable until well on into the future, meaning that Russian supply abilities throughout the entirety of the southern front may be greatly impeded from this point on because of the pretty much the loss of that main line as a whole until that train is cleared or until that obstacle is covered up so that way the train can pass on. Moving on out of that, however, and on into the rest of our Ukraine war news, we were also able to see in our location unknowns that apparently the Russians also surrendered an entire BTR-80 recently to the Ukrainian armed forces, which we can see in this clip right here.
Цапало все, пригнали нам БТР. Тепер служитиме добрій справі. Слава Україні!
And that's the end of the clip. It appears the Ukrainians will have an ambition to be able to put this BTR back into service on the Ukrainian side and to ensure that the Russian Federation will no longer be able to use those kinds of vehicles any longer, at least that one in particular. We also got to see the Russian casualty report for the day, which was also quite nice. Unfortunately, there were no Bobcat skid steers that were lost, but Ms. Disick here, the record stated that it was another average day, which is quite true. Troop losses are under 1,000, and the total should be 1,020,980. It actually appears that it's 1,002,980, which is incorrect. But outside of that, we were able to hear that the Russians have lost 970 wounded and killed over the course of today, along with 6 APCs, 103 supply trucks, 3 main battle tanks, 36 artillery pieces, 144 drones, and that was about it. But it does appear that, at least at the moment, the Russian Federation is still taking decent losses and are not really making much ground throughout most of the front. We were able to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces have held the front in Kupiansk. Russian Federation forces are attempting advances through the Vilshana and Malolivka area, but are not really making much ground. The Ukrainians have been able to solidify some defensive positions, at least to the area of Petropavlivka, near to the open fields, and this is making Russian advances through this area pressingly difficult. and making it incredibly difficult for the Russians to actually advance onto the city of Kupiansk itself and threaten it with the heights that are found around the area of Kucherivka, overlooking the city. We have also seen that further down the line, within the Svatove area or the northern Luhansk plain, there has not really been a lot of progress by Russian armed forces in this area either, and it does appear that Russian offensives have largely slowed or stalled within that area, and that this front may have actually become inactive, at least recently. We have also been able to hear that within the Kremena area, or specifically the Severonsky Forest, that the Foreign Legion and other elements are continuing to defend doggedly their positions, and are stopping any further Russian advances outside of Dubrova, heading westwards towards Torske and Zarichne, which are directly along the road heading to the town of Liman, which you can actually see right here. Liman did suffer significant damage from the battles that occurred in the earlier and mid parts of 2022, but since then has been under Ukrainian control and serves as a vital town that could be a defensive structure or a defensive site once again in the future, although its defensive abilities are dubious, as it does have one bridge access across the Severetsky Donets River that allows for access to Liman, which largely makes it more so an offender's advantage if taken rather than a defender's advantage for the Ukrainians to keep. Moving on from that, though, and down through the area of Bakhmut, or largely the Konstantinivka front, we have seen the Ukrainian forces have continued to hold their lines in Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, and Poltavka over the course of the day, and have not allowed for the Russian forces to be able to advance any further outside of Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, or Poltavka into the area of Konstantinivka. The Ukrainian armed forces do understand that Konstantinivka is quite important, and Konstantinivka is also the major supply axis for this entire ongoing battlefield. If the Russian Federation does advance over Chasiv Yar and down towards Konstantinivka, this will actually give the Russians a significant advantage in firepower, as they will be able to base artillery in Chasiv Yar and mostly to be able to extend their range slightly due to the increased elevation, bringing the towns of Drushivka and the entire road, the H20 heading into Konstantinivka, under threat of constant Russian artillery fire, and bringing this entire area under the risk of being lost by the Ukrainian armed forces. Moving further on down to Pokrovsk, however, we have been able to see that the Ukrainian armed forces are continuing to hold the town of Pokrovsk and are stopping Russian advances near to the area of Shevchenko, Lysivka, Pischane, and Udachne, largely stopping the Russian advance where it is at the moment south of Pokrovsk. However, the Russians are beginning a new pincer maneuver further north near to the area of Malanivka and are attempting to advance onto the town of Drobopilia, which is one of the major supply axes for the defenders within Pokrovsk and the surrounding village outside of Pokrovsk on the village defense chain. If the Russian Federation does manage to threaten this road directly either with drones or artillery forces, this will make the supply situation for the Ukrainians in Pokrovsk very difficult, and we may see that at that point the Ukrainians may start to decide to conduct a strategic withdrawal from this city, although that does not appear likely yet. And if the Ukrainians are able to stabilize the northern pincer maneuver and stop the Russians from advancing any closer to the road at Drobopilia, the Ukrainians will be able to hold on to Pokrovsk into the foreseeable future and continue to cause significant casualties for Russian forces on this front. But we were able to see that some motorbike units within the area near to Shevchenko were taken out today by Ukrainian drone forces, which we can see in this clip right here, with the motorbike getting hit and then knocked out immediately. And we can actually see the FPV drone's view right there as it dropped the explosive onto the motorbike and then the motorbike crashed out. That was the end of the clip, but still showing us the Ukrainian drone activities are causing casualties for Russian forces and losses of supplies throughout most of those areas of the front. But with that, it is now time for us to move on up into Kyiv and to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, here on day 1224 of the war. So, without further ado, here is the speech. Peach!
Українці, українки, сьогодні весь день тривав розбір завалів після удару по Гуляйполю. На жаль, є втрати і військові, і цивільні. Загинув командир 110-ї окремої механізованої бригади, полковник Захаревич і інші хлопці з бригади. Мої співчуття усім рідним та близьким. Триває повне розслідування обставин цього удару. Я чекаю на доповідь. Усім, хто був поранений, а це був ракетний удар, усім надають необхідну допомогу. Більш ніж 30 людей були поранені. Ми обов'язково відповімо росіянам на цей удар. Сьогодні було багато різних нарад, підготовчих нарад передусім. Ми готуємось до зустрічей в Європі, зокрема в Данії, і також з іншими нашими партнерами. Серед головних питань буде виробництво зброї, наші спільні інвестиції, наші спільні проекти. Сьогодні почалось нове головування в Раді ЄС, головування саме Данії. Для нас важливо, щоб цей період, а це наступні півроку, стали дійсно результативними і в безпекових питаннях, і в тому числі для оборонної промисловості, і в питаннях санкцій, щоб увесь тиск проти Росії дійсно працював і працював так, щоб закінчити цю війну і реально обмежити російський потенціал агресії. У нас є чітка інформація, і партнери це підтверджують, що санкції для Росії дійсно болісні. І якщо тиск ще збільшити, це буде спонукати Росію справді думати про щось ще, окрім фронту та ненависті до сусідів. Сьогодні говорив з президентом Азербайджану Ільхамом Алієвим. Я подякував йому за підтримку України, нашої незалежності, нашої територіальної цілісності, а також висловив Азербайджану повну нашу підтримку і солідарність. Зараз Росія розпалює нову кампанію ворожнечі проти сусідів, і після жорсткого вбивства в Росії 2 людей з азербайджанської громади ще й погрожує азербайджанській державі. Треба, щоб всі партнери однаково це сприймали. Сприймали як загрозу не комусь одному, а всім. Всім, хто поруч з Росією. Вбиваючи одних та принижуючи інших, Росія намагається залякати і підкорити всіх. Це треба зупиняти. Має бути достатній захист життя для кожного народу. І абсолютна повага до гідності людей. Ще кілька речей. Україна продовжує боротись за справедливість. За справедливе покарання Росії, за злочин агресії проти нашої держави і народу. І за справедливу відповідальність всіх, хто обрав для себе особисто Росію, а не мирне і нормальне життя. Сьогодні я підписав документи, щоб направити на ратифікацію нашу угоду з Радою Європи про створення спеціального трибуналу щодо злочину агресії. Маємо абсолютно точно напрацювати таймінг, тобто терміни, коли всі процедурні рішення для запуску трибуналу будуть реалізовані. І коли фактично відбудеться запуск трибуналу. Я очікую доповідь з цього приводу від Міністерства закордонних справ України та юристів Офісу одразу після ратифікації угоди про трибунал. Також ми продовжуємо працювати і по українському санкційному напрямку. Незабаром будуть нові рішення Ради національної безпеки та оборони щодо санкцій. Вже готуються відповідні матеріали. Також я підписав сьогодні указ про відзначення наших воїнів державними нагородами. Майже щодня такі укази. Цього разу достатньо великий указ. В ньому 414 захисників, більшість з них з Національної гвардії України, 354 воїни Нацгвардії. Серед них в тому числі азовці, захисники Маріуполя, хлопці, яких ми повернули з російського полону. І працюємо, щоб звільнити всіх наших людей, кожного воїна, кожного цивільного, всіх дорослих та дітей, які ще утримуються в російській неволі. Я дякую всім, хто нам допомагає. Дякую всім нашим людям. Слава Україні!
Ram Slava. And that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine here on day 1,224 of the war. And that is going to be moving us on into the second segment of this stream, where we get to talk to each and every one of y'all. But before we get into that, there is one last thing that we have to cover. And it's this little piece of news right here, as we were able to hear that a Russian inspector satellite, which has been shadowing a U.S. satellite in orbit, has deployed an unknown object, likely a highly maneuverable sub-satellite equipped with high-speed kinetic anti-satellite weaponry. As we were able to see here, that two earlier satellites of the same type, Cosmos 2519 and 2542, also released sub-satellites designated Cosmos 2521 and 2543. Both of those sub-satellites showed significant maneuvering capability, and each fired a high-speed projectile that was interpreted by the Pentagon as an anti-satellite weapon. This happened when they were flying in the vicinity of other Russian satellites. The Russian inspector satellites and their passengers are part of a project called Nivelier, which I described in these articles, which we were able to see down here. But it does appear that the Russian Federation may have been trying to show off a little bit of new satellite weaponry today, fairly crude and archaic, but still devastating and damaging nevertheless, as the entirety of our space infrastructure is built around the concept that space would never be weaponized. And this is leading a lot of people to ask the question. U.S. officials say a Russian satellite stalking satellites deployed anti-satellite weaponry today. There were so many satellite words, my head's spinning. But a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts, and many people are saying that Russia is threatening the U.S. directly. That was the 63% that said that as a result of the news we were able to hear today. 15% said it seems like it's overhyped. 12% are saying Russia is just testing the weapon, and about 10% are saying they're unsure and undecided. But it does appear that many people are talking about the situation in the moment, and it is quite an interesting one. I generally have to go with the 62%. This is threatening the United States directly, as a weaponization of space is a violation of the Outer Space Treaties, which have specifically noted that no country on the planet can deploy or use any kind of offensive weaponry in space of any kind, including that. So it is quite clear at the moment that the Russian Federation is once again breaking the Outer Space Treaties once more, and is openly trying to threaten the United States with these weapons tests that were conducted inside of the orbit or low Earth orbit with those satellites today. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, it is time for us. It is time, folks, for us to move on into those questions in general, as we do have quite a great many, and we want to make sure to get to as many of them as we can tonight. And moving on into the question segment, we have, starting off for our first question, or super chat of the segment so far, a $50 super chat from Donald Shelton. Hey, and a huge thanks to Donald Shelton. He didn't throw in a comment, but his support is massively appreciated because it helps us to be able to keep this channel running and make it possible. I've got to thank you so much once again for that incredible support, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it running still to this day. Moving on from that and on into our next one, we also got a $50 super chat from Fred Vreeman. And Fred Vreeman said, hey, I usually listen in delayed, but today I started early. I love you guys. I support you on Patreon and wonder how much support you get from there. I gotta thank you for the support, Fred Freeman, and I gotta thank you incredibly for helping this channel to keep it running. I gotta thank you for supporting us on Patreon as well, Fred. The answer to that is that we get a decent amount of support, but it's not close to the kind of support that we actually get through Super Chats. Super Chats are the bulk of the income that we make here on this channel to be able to keep running this as a business, but that generally is how that sort of a support structure works so far. We try and plug Patreon as much as we can, but Patreon is more so something that we plug specifically on our short war videos that we make, that we put out in the day. But if you do want to support our Patreon, the link is in the description below the stream, and you can go down there and support it if you'd like to. And so a massive thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep running, because if it wasn't for folks like you who helped to keep this channel running and made this thing possible, we wouldn't be able to make this thing a reality to this day. So a huge thanks to you so much once again for the support, Fred Freeman. I hope that has addressed that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $20 super chat from Erlen Gruel. And Erlen Gruel said, you guys are still the best news show on the internet. Now, I got to thank you incredibly for those kind words and the support, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep on running this news show on the internet each and every single day, day in and day out. And I got to thank you incredibly once again, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to keep this thing rolling. We just wouldn't be able to make it possible. I say that time and time again like a broken record, but it is entirely true that each and every supporter of the channel in the Super Chats and Patreon deserves to hear that claim and that thanks, because if it wasn't for folks like y'all, we would not be able to make this channel possible. We would have never been able to keep it running, and it takes the entirety of our supporters here in the LSA to be able to make this thing possible and keep it rolling. So with that, a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that amazingly well, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we would have never been able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it rolling. And moving on from that, we also have a $20 super chat from Scott Rowe. And Scott Rowe didn't throw in a comment, but we absolutely thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling. If it wasn't for folks like you, where would we be? Well, we wouldn't be able to be here, that's for sure. And I got to thank you so much once again, because if it wasn't if for the amazing folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel rolling, and we wouldn't be able to make it possible. And also, Royal Flaviness said, take a shot every time the Enforcer says if it wasn't for folks like you twice or more on a single super chat. I'm doing that a lot because without Enforcer Matt here, there is not a lot of additional content to be had, because I can't really react to my own statements, or I can't really react to other statements that aren't mine because there's none being made. So y'all are literally just getting the Enforcer raw tonight without Enforcer Matt. So this is kind of just my train of thought, and I'm stretching it out as long as I can, as a matter of fact. It's just that we cannot stretch this thing out without a second co-host here. Like this, like a second co-host like Enforcer Matt, it allows for us to have conversations, differing opinions, different kinds of analysis, or to expound on our analysis. It's just impossible to do any of that without Enforcer Matt here, so it greatly cuts down on the amount of comments I can make, and it really gets it just straight to, like, the lean cuts of info. Like on the news tonight, there wasn't like any additional extrapolation or analysis. It's just straight up what the analysis was. This is what it is. And then moving on into the next thing. So the news segment was even greatly shortened tonight. Usually it's about an hour and 40 minutes long. Tonight it was about an hour and 20 minutes. So yeah, that was a interesting thing to do. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. But with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $20 super chat from Maine, Canada, 182. And Maine, Canada said, sorry I'm late, was out watching fireworks. And happy Canada Day, my fellow Canadians. And long live the LSA. And hey, a happy Canada Day. Huge thanks to you for the support on Canada Day. And a big shout out to all of our Canadian viewers who did celebrate Canada Day today. It's pretty much their version in Canada of the 4th of July that we have down here in the United States. And it's literally just a few days off from our 4th of July. But I do thank you incredibly for the support, and I have to say that Canada Day is quite an interesting day. Canada's independence wasn't fought over a bloody conflict like the American Revolutionary War. It just slowly was something that ended up happening. But I do have to thank you incredibly for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible. We wouldn't be able to keep it running. And I gotta say, that's an amazing thing to know that folks like you are here with this channel, all the way up there from the amazing lands of Canada, and to continue to support this channel and ensure that the Lee Spring Army will live long and never die. And so, a massive thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And if you are a Canadian viewer, please make sure to let us know by saying Happy Canada Day in the live chat. And if you are not a Canadian viewer, just say Happy Canada Day to all the amazing Canadian folks who are here, because they make up an amazing part of the Lee Spring Army and are a great group of folks. And so with that, a big thanks once again to Made in Canada 182. And we are going to be moving on to the next one, which is a $20 super chat from VS. And VS said, what would you think about a new White House petition to symbolically redesignate the South China Sea to the Indo-Pacific Sea? P.S. My donation is a Tiananmen Square reference. And I gotta thank you for support, VS. I would actually have to say that I'm not really a fan of renaming anything. The South China Sea is the South China Sea, and the East China Sea is the East China Sea. That's just how I look at it. I really don't like on a personal conviction of mine, I really do not like when people go around renaming stuff, like renaming the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Gulf and the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. I just find renamings to be kind of tacky, just to be entirely honest. You know, like, for example, like Fort Benning being renamed Fort Moore for a while, I just generally find that kind of stuff tacky, and I really don't like the modern political motivations that go behind it, at least in my opinion. The South China Sea is called the South China Sea because China, historically, has been the most significant landmass in the area. So for that reason, also considering that it shares more coastline with the South China Sea than any other country, it's named the South China Sea. It has nothing to do with China having ownership over it. It's just the name, and that's how I always think about it. It just happens to be the name that it gets. Like when, for example, Burma was renamed Myanmar, and then Turkey tried to do its rebranding into Turkaya. or the Czech Republic renamed to Czechia. I just don't. I just mentally do not recognize those names. Czechia is the Czech Republic. Turkaya is Turkey. The South China Sea is the South China Sea. The Persian Gulf is still the Persian Gulf to me. It's not the Arabian Gulf. And the Gulf of Mexico is the Gulf of Mexico. It's not the Gulf of America. That's just how I look at the stuff. And it's also like that as well with mountains like Mount McKinley. Mount McKinley was Mount McKinley. It was renamed to Donnelly for a while, but I always remembered it as Mount McKinley. You know, I just like to know that when something's named, the name isn't being changed. Because also, who's to say that, like, I just don't know. Like, also renaming the stuff, it takes away a lot of the specialness of it or the historical significance of it, and it almost is like a corporate renaming. Like, the Arabian Gulf sounds like the Ronald McDonald Gulf, and the Gulf of America sounds like Ronald McDonald Gulf. It doesn't sound like it has any kind of specific heritage to the historical region that it's in. It's just kind of like this generic corporatized rebranding of a geographic area. Because the Gulf of America, it's just... It is one of the most, along with the Arabian Gulf, it is one of the most corporate sounding rebrandings of an area that I've ever heard. It has no specific historical reference to it because if this is the Gulf of America, shouldn't this be the American Sea? Like, shouldn't the Caribbean be renamed to the American Sea because it is a sea that is completely housed within islands in the mainlands of North and South America? So isn't that the American Sea? I mean, like, shouldn't we rename that too? Or should we rename the North Atlantic into the American British Ocean? Like, I just don't know. Like, the renaming is getting crazy to me, at least. You know, it's starting to take away a lot of the specificity and the historical precedence of most areas of the world. And I'm just not really a big fan of renaming stuff at all. Like, even if someone who a place was named after ends up becoming unpopular in the future, I just don't like the idea of renaming it because that's what that place was always known as. Like, it's like going to London and saying, oh, you know, we don't like the Romans now. The Roman Empire was a really bad place, so let's change the name of London into something else like British Happy Welcome Land. Like, it's like it just doesn't carry along anything with it anymore like the name London does. London carries a lot of history because it was originally Londinium, and then it turned into London. It was spelled in a really weird way. It was Old English, and then eventually it evolved into London that we see today. There's a lot of history behind the name of London, and it has a sound significance behind it. Like the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf isn't named because Iran owns it. It's named the Persian Gulf because the Kingdom of Persia was one of the most important kingdoms in the area when the Persian Gulf was named by European explorers. And to this day, it's still generally the Persian Gulf. It was called the Persian Gulf when the Islamic Republic of Iran originally was founded. We didn't strip the Kingdom of Persia from its old, I guess you could say, glory or impact on the region by changing it to the Arabian Gulf. I just don't like the stuff. I get it that it's a joke, but on like a personal sort of a conviction, I just don't like renaming anything. I just think it all should stay the way it is. Like the Koreas. Like, I think I would say this. My personal opinion is if the Koreas are ever united, it should not be called the United Koreas or whatever people want to come up with. It should be called the Republic of Joseon because that's the historical name for Korea, and so that would be staying within the historic naming conventions and having a decent amount of historical significance and connections to the past in that kind of a naming convention. You know, like that's even having to rename something because of a change, but it's also making sure that the renaming stays within some sort of a historic framework of a sort. But still, I hope that does address that well. I do thank you for the support, though, and helping this channel to keep on running, VS. And also, I gotta say that nothing ever happened in Tiananmen Square in 1984 in Beijing. Nothing ever happened. Forever and ever. Ever and ever. It just didn't happen. Nothing happened there. What happened? Nothing. Who happened? Nothing. It was just a day. It was just any normal day. But beyond that, a big thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $20 super chat from Dustin. And Dustin said, I'm a fairly new recruit to the LSA, watching from the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. Hey, really cool to hear. The Olympic Peninsula. of Washington State. That's this area up here, actually. And let's see. Thank you for keeping us well informed on global events and Slovukraine and Slovukania. And I got to thank you for the support. And I got to say, really cool to hear that you're actually from the Olympic Peninsula. The Olympic Peninsula is actually that little jutting out area for most people that look at the map, right out here. It's west of Seattle. It's this giant thing right here. It's probably one of the most iconic sorts of distinctive features of the geography of the state of Washington. And I got to say, it's really cool to know that you're from there because I've always wanted to go to the Olympic National Park. I mean, look at the beauty of this thing. It's a gorgeous place. And I would love to go see that personally myself. I mean, that right there looks like that Forest of Endor thing from Star Wars that was in, I think, like the 6th movie, technically, in the chronology. I'm not sure. I don't know. But beyond that, it is just such a cool place. I would personally love to go and see it myself because it's just crazy. I mean, look at it. Look at it. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Who in the world could disagree? And I got to thank you for being one of the folks from there. And we're happy to be able to share the news with everyone around the world. We try our best to make sure it's as well researched and well informed as it possibly can be. And I'm happy to know that we are hopefully meeting the criteria for all of y'all here, at least right now. We try our best every single night to put this thing together. I, of course, have to thank Matthew greatly for continuing to moderate the channel and also gather up everything in the chat in the spreadsheet so that way we can make sure to keep this channel running as seamlessly and smoothly as it possibly can. If it wasn't for folks like y'all, we just would never be able to make this channel possible. We wouldn't have never been able to keep it running, and I've just got to thank y'all incredibly for enjoying it. I got to thank you incredibly for enjoying it as well and becoming a new member of the Lee Spring Army, Dustin. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. And of course, long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never die. And so a huge thank you to you once again. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $10 super chat from Exotic Parallel. And Exotic Parallel said, in Battlefield 3, Iran smuggles carryable tactical nukes from Russia or China into target cities to bypass air defense, etc. Is this at all possible? Does that tech exist? Small yield, but exist? Technically it does, actually. That is actually one of the biggest concerns of the U.S. National Security, the NSA, or the National Security Authority or Administration currently, is the idea that a small, dirty bomb or a tactical nuclear bomb could just be smuggled into the country. This is actually why at most major ports of access at harbors, there are generally scanners that we have that are able to scan intermodal containers for trace amounts of uranium or any radioactive materials. This is because after 9/11 was conducted, we were generally scared that some sort of a terrorist organization may attempt to smuggle in a dirty bomb at some point and detonate inside the United States. So we actually started to create those defenses at most of our major ports to be able to stop that from happening. So generally, while the technology could exist to do something like that, the ability for them to get that into the country is a little bit more unlikely. They probably would not be able to, and it would probably be stopped before it could. That's also similar for most other countries in the Western world, in Europe or East Asia, or in Australia and New Zealand. They would also have the same abilities to be able to stop those kinds of explosives from getting in before they actually could get in. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least with the information that we have at the moment, because it doesn't really appear that that's likely. Yes, it is possible to make a bomb that's small enough and transportable like that, but you'd still have to get it into the country by a ship. There would really be no way to bring that in by plane. So I hope that does address that the best I can. A big thanks to you so much once again, Exotic Parallel. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $10 super chat from Siri. And Siri said, thank you for your hard work and the amazing community you've built, Enforcer Bros. Has anyone heard from a channel legend Marie LSA lately? And hugs from Oslo. And big hugs to Oslo and all of our Norwegian viewers. Personally, we haven't heard from Marie LSA, at least lately. I haven't seen her in the chat tonight. Hopefully she's doing well. She's a old Garden channel legend through and through. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to get any updates on our end about where Marie LSA is or what she's been up to lately. But I haven't really seen her here often, so hopefully she'll be back soon. But I do thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Siri, because if it wasn't for folks like you all the way up from Norway, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it running. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, and hopefully we'll be able to see that Marie LSA returns here soon, safe and sound, and of course back in the LSA like she's always been. And so with that, we are going to be moving on into our next one, which is a $5 super chat from Robert Johnson. And Robert Johnson said, Slava Ukraini and Slava Ukraini, Haram Slava. I got to thank you so much for the support, Robert Johnson. Folks like you make this channel possible. And we're on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Declan Gibo. And Declan Gibo said, time to stand as one big alliance. And I would definitely agree with you. I would say that we should stand as a large alliance. It's a, let's see. Oh man, I saw Enforcer Matt respond to something there. Yeah, you would probably be surprised with that, Miss Silverhand. But beyond that, I do have to thank you so much for the support, Declan. And I'd have to say it is a time to stand as a grand alliance. United will stand, divided we will fall. That statement is certainly true in the modern day with the kind of world we find ourselves in. Because if we are not united, our enemies will certainly be united and will tear us apart from within. So hopefully we'll be able to see that we can defend ourselves against the threats that the Axis is currently presenting to us at the moment. So a big thanks to you once again, and we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Jeffrey Walker. Jeffrey Walker said, just say thank you. And I gotta say, well, actually, Jeffrey Walker said, just thank you. He didn't say, just say thank you. I thought that was a joke about someone else saying, have you at least said thank you? But I do thank you, Jeffrey Walker, for the thanks and enjoying this channel enough to support it and help it to keep rolling. If it wasn't for folks like you, we would have never been able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't have been able to keep it rolling today, tonight, tomorrow, and well into the future, and hopefully when Enforcer Matt returns, because he will be returning quite soon. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Thank you so much once again. And also, I just saw someone say something in the chat that was actually quite interesting. Something that actually sounds like it makes sense, but it actually doesn't. And I'll tell you why. It's not a stupid question, though. It's a great question, Canadian Bacon. Canadian Bacon asked, why don't they empty every single container for inspection and also find more contraband, such as drugs? We need to stop fentanyl. Seriously, it's costing our youth. It's not only costing our youth, it's costing us tens of thousands of adult-age citizens every year. It's actually quite a significant issue. The problem is, however, is that intermodal containers, there's a bit of an issue with them. Intermodal containers are built for efficiency. If you are offloading them and then reloading them at every single port of access, you're cutting down massively on the logistical efficiency of the supply chain in general, on the supposed threat that there is going to be some sort of drugs or contraband or illegal materials inside of every shipping container, possibly. And one second, folks, I'm going to take a little sip here. I feel like I'm in a congressional hearing now doing that. But beyond that, it is generally because it cuts down on supply efficiency. Back in the day, before containers were a thing, the specific goods or cargo could actually be accounted piece by piece. But that's because break bulk shipping was the only kind of shipping. And that's where you have an older merchant ship. Let me show y'all this one. This is probably one of the best ones that I could show y'all quickly off the top of my head. Like these Liberty ships here. And Liberty ships are designed very differently than modern container ships. They have giant open voids inside the ship that they call holds. And these weird sprigs up here on the deck were actually cranes. They would lift off the cargo in small little pallets that had to be hand loaded, and then they drop them down into the holds, and a whole bunch of guys called longshoremen would have to sit down there and cram and pack everything where they could to where it wouldn't budge on the voyage, but also at the same time where it would trim the ship with the way it was loaded. This was an incredibly long and arduous process, and every single time the cargo had to be moved, you had to completely unload everything and completely reload everything. It made international trade incredibly expensive and incredibly rare. That's why in America, up until the container ship era, having something from overseas was considered to be really high end. Like nowadays, when someone drives around a Mercedes, it could literally be anyone. It could be, it could be the very pimps that are selling the drugs, that are coming through on the containers. You can get a car from anywhere in the world pretty easily. They could be made in South Korea, Japan, Germany, Britain, wherever, whenever. They will make it up to America, and they'll be sold pretty quick. That has nothing to do with containers, but that's still kind of how it works these days. And it didn't work like that back then. A lot more difficult to get cars overseas back then for export. But this system was incredibly slow and arduous. When they started to work on containers, and I have to think of the guy's name. It was something McLean. Dang, I'm trying to think. Malcolm McLean, that's his name. Let me go show y'all this. Malcolm McLean is not the creator of the container, of the shipping container. He is more so like the Edison or the Henry Ford of the shipping container. He's the guy who made it mainstream because he saw that there was a lot of business potential in this. And McLean said, what if we took the cargo, loaded it up at the factory it was made, into a standardized shaped container, and then shipped that container untouched, unopened from point A to its delivery point at point B? You cut out all of the cost. It becomes incredibly cheap. All you have to do at that point is factor in the cost of transport, because the cost of loading and unloading made up for about 40 to 50% of the cost of a good that was exported at retail back in the day, because that's how much the handling cost. That's why shipping and handling was a big deal. Nowadays, with containers, it isn't really handling anymore. It's more so just shipping. They were able to remove about 40 to 50% of the overall costs of handling this freight by putting them into containers. And also, there was another big thing. When you had the longshoremen loading up ships like this, whenever there was a good set of goods that came through, like liquor or cigarettes or something like that, a lot of them would just end up missing. And that's because the longshoremen would just steal them. Like, they would just flat out steal tons of the shit. So if you were working down the docks, you were always boozed up and had a whole bunch of cigs for free, because you just steal them out of the cargo of cigs and alcohol that were being sold elsewhere. So a lot of these, so McLean actually marketed these shipping containers to companies as, hey, look, everyone, not only is it incredibly cheap and efficient to move cargo around in shipping containers instead of break bulk like this, it's also a lot safer because we lock the containers. No one's going to bust into these containers until they get to where they're supposed to be. And so everyone was like, wow, this is incredible. Like, it's secure. No one's going to be stealing our goods in transport. We're not going to have to factor in losses. And this is also a big thing for shipping companies, because they're like, we don't have to pay out any kind of loss fees or loss tickets, because there's not going to be any anymore. So that was a huge thing that went into the shipping container world. And that's what actually made global trade blow up. That's also why, if you look, you'll actually see this. That most GDPs globally in the Western world started to skyrocket around the 1970s, right here, when that kind of massive export market became available because of containerized shipping like that. And that's when you saw that the United States economy started to blow up, because we could export literally anything and everything around the world. And China also used that to their success as well back in the early 2000s, because they started to invest heavily as a government into these shipping containers like Shanghai and others to be able to bring their goods out into the international world and sell them wherever they wanted to. It makes loads of money to trade. And so that was the big thing. If you take those containers and you unload them and reload them every single time they come into a port, you're going right back to the break bulk standard of shipping, which means that there is a load of handling costs that will then be involved, and that makes it a way more expensive to import or export anything. It's pretty much a ghost tariff of a sort on everything, and for that reason, everything's going to become far more expensive in America. So that's kind of the issue as to why no one will ever do something like that, at least in the modern day, is because it will send shockwaves through the supply chain here in America and also for everyone else overseas. If the U.S. started to do that, or if everyone started to do that, you would literally go back to the days of the break bulk shipping standard, and then pretty much the import and export market would come to a grinding halt instantly. Just to try and explain why that isn't really doable. Sounds like a great idea, because if you did it, you would be able to find literally anything coming to the country that's not supposed to be here, like drugs, but then you would also be pretty much destroying the economy in another sense. So it's kind of necessary evils. Do we let everything in like it's always been with the containers, and then some drugs get in? Or do we completely destroy the economy but stop the drugs from coming in? It's a double-edged sort of a story. Either way, you're going to end up dealing with some pretty nasty consequences. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least from the knowledge that I have off of how international shipping works. And Matthew can tell you all that I did read like a 600-page book on the history of shipping containers and how it all works. And it was very interesting. It was actually a book called
true.
the... Oh, Matthew actually chipped in. It's true. Like, I heard him say, it's true. Matthew, would you like to speak for a brief moment, just on air, to let everyone know that you're alive and well?
So I don't know how well it's going to come through, and also I'm holding the microphone in my hand, but I think it's coming through bad. Actually, just turned red.
It's coming through a little rough, but we can still hear you. Oh, well, it sounds like it's taking about an hour for that to get through. So we will just keep moving on. We'll just keep moving on without Enforcer Man. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, and it sounds like the quality is so bad that I'm pretty much telling it to the Curiosity rover on Mars. It takes about 2 months for the message to get there, and about 2 months for the message to get back. So we'll just keep pressing on. But Matthew is alive. He's well, and he is working. He is working hard behind the scenes. He's just not up front on the stream tonight. But he is alive, everyone. I have been able to confirm that. And so outside of that,
now?
is it better? It's slightly better, but please go ahead.
Well, it's working slightly, but this is the downside of not having a Starlink. Although I couldn't use a Starlink anyway because I'm not in a location to be able to use it. But
And
you know, hotspot not the best thing. And also, motel Wi-Fi sucks.
Yeah, motel Wi-Fi generally sucks. You know, there's actually been a big debate that's been going on behind the scenes, folks, here at Enforcer HQ. What is better, having a mobile setup or having a fixed-in-place setup? I've always said it's better to have a fixed-in-place setup, generally for the reason that if I'm on a trip, we generally do not have time to run a show because this show takes up a good amount of the day, setting up the prep and all that sort of stuff. And also, I'd have to set up the whole setup, so that would take pretty much the whole time of the day, and I'm just creating a whole headache of just traveling around for who knows why to set up this thing and run it every day, not do anything anywhere where I'm going. On the other hand, Matthew has built his entire setup to be heavily mobile. And the reason why is because we could travel anywhere in the country if we needed to and run the show everywhere. And his setup is so mobile, he actually can do that with relative ease. You know what the issue is? Here's the big underlying issue. It's pretty much the fact that internet sucks everywhere in a hotel or anywhere that's not a house where you have like a pre-set up internet plan. So it's kind of like saying I have an airplane that can fly anywhere in the world without refueling. It's just that the plane is so big and heavy that it can't land at any runway. That's kind of the issue with Matthew's setup. He is suffering from success. That's like a DJ Khaled kind of a thing, I think. But beyond that, it's actually a little bit annoying from a business perspective for our end because if the internet's actually worked like these hotels claim they did, Matthew could actually be mobile, and I actually would start working towards a mobile setup. But every single time he goes anywhere, it always proves to me the claim that having a fixed-in-place setup is the only thing that makes sense to me. Because if we have a mobile setup like that, I move the whole damn setup to set it up in a hotel and then have shit internet and then not even be able to run a show for all of y'all. We wouldn't even have one host on air. Both hosts would be knocked out. So luckily, my setup is fixed in
It's
place.
just here though. Like that's the weird thing though. Is it's just here because I haven't had this problem before. I've streamed from hotels before and I've never had this problem.
Yeah, but that's kind of like the thing, though, is that you're playing Russian roulette, like we're playing Russian roulette. The whole setup was mobile, because if I went with you and we were playing Russian roulette, then we set up the stream, I start talking on air, and I go, I'm the enforcer, the break notes, and then everyone's gonna be like, man, this sucks, and then they're gonna get off air because they can't even hear what I'm saying, and then we run a whole wasted show. So that's kind of like my thing. It's like, you know, not only is it a whole deal to set this thing up and run the show, so it wouldn't even make sense to travel, but you play Russian roulette every single time you go into a hotel as to whether or not the internet will work or a hotspot will work or everything else.
You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive in my car. I'm going to head to a place tomorrow night that I can actually stream from the car, and I'm going to see if that fixes it.
Oh, you could. I mean, you could. It's gonna. I don't know how you're gonna do it in a car, but everyone, Enforcer Matt is going to do it in a car. Like he's gonna set up the stream. He's gonna run it in a car.
Really weird.
That actually did sound really sus. I'm gonna have to retract that. I was actually saying that more like the novelty of like he's going to run a stream in the car. That actually be the first time we've ever run a stream from inside a car. But it was not meant the other way because actually now that Matthew said that did come out really sus. So we're gonna back off of that because that was not the way it was meant. And now I can see some people saying LMAO in the chat. That is not the way it was meant. He's going to run a stream in the car, not whatever the hell was people were implying through that. So anyways, with that, I hope that addresses that. Also, someone said, "Live in your car?" No. He's not living in the car. He's not living in the car. He's out on a long duration mission right now for the LSA. That's it. So he's going to be back soon. I can say this: he is somewhere in the United States right now. I cannot get any more specific than that, but he is traveling at the moment. And so that will be That's kind of what's going on right now. So he's got a car. But he'll be trying to run the stream out of a car. But Enforcer Matt is going to be doing it out of a car, but he's not going to be doing it out of a car, if you know what I mean. So let me make that a little bit more clear. Anyways, with that, man, I feel like Bush right now, man, where he was like, man and fish can coexist peacefully. I feel like that because of that. That was a Bushism right there. But with that, I hope that addresses that somewhat well, at least the best we can. And also, let's see. I see, for some reason, a load of people are talking about Seattle now. Like, there's like 9 million Seattle jokes being made. Someone's like, hey, they're in Seattle. Lots of them live in their cars. Someone else said, do you ever want to do a show from Seattle? You can use my basement. It has gig internet. And thank you so much for the option, Mark. We generally don't travel around a lot. I like the setup to be permanent because the thing is that with traveling is generally because you want to go see something or do something. And with how this show works, it literally eats up the whole day. Like, my life revolves around running the show because I have to drink a lot of coffee to run it, because if I don't, I am not able to mentally fire off quick enough to be able to monologue for hours. So I drink so much coffee that when I get off air, I'm still up for about another 4 hours after the show ends. So I go to sleep at like 4 in the morning, or 5 in the morning sometimes, and then I wake up around 11 or 12 most days. So then half of the daylight's gone, and then I get up and I try and tend to all of the tasks that I can with the remaining daylight left when the shops are open, and then I sit down at about 6 o'clock or so, and I start working on looking at the news, trying to memorize it, and then by 7, I'm putting everything down on the map, making a thumbnail, a title, all that sort of stuff, then running the show. So it's really impossible for me, at least, to travel anywhere and then run the show, because my life literally revolves around having to run this show at the moment. So if I try and do that, it's defeating the purpose of traveling, because I'm just creating a whole lot of headaches and obstacles to simply live my life, but make it a lot more complicated at that point. So being in a permanent position, like, in HQ like we have, that's a lot more of a better sort of a place to be than constantly on the move, because that just would wear me down fast. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. At least as far as why we don't really, well, I don't travel around a lot. Matthew technically could, but then he also plays the risk of not having good internet, like he's having right now, and then we can't really hear him at all. So with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well, but it is time for us to move on into the next one. And the next one is an unbelievable 100 Canadian super chat from LC39A. And LC39A said, when Zelensky was in the White House, he should have told the president, this is our 1776. The president said, you started it. Who started the Boston Tea Party? That's a good question. Who started the Boston Tea Party? But who started the fire? We didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turning. Also, Matthew is correct. He had to take this trip. It is an important mission for the LSA. But outside of that, I will say that it's LC39, you make a good point. But at least from an American perspective, the fire didn't start there. There are actually a lot of things historically that led to the Boston Tea Party, at least from an American perspective. So while it would make sense from a standalone sort of a statement like that, at least for American historians, or at least American-centric historians, it would be a little bit more difficult to sell, because the whole reason why the Boston Tea Party happened is because the 7 Years' War happened, which in America is called the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was an extension of the 7 Years' War that happened in Europe, which is where the British and the French fought each other in the Ohio River Valley area, pretty much in modern-day Ohio. As a result of that, the British would end up winning, but also, while the British would end up winning and they would take control technically of all the territories west of the Appalachians up to the Mississippi River, at the same time, they also had to declare to the Native American tribes in the area a proclamation line of 1763, which was the year the war ended, which meant that English settlers or British settlers could not travel over the Appalachian Mountains into the Northwest Territories, which is what those were called. Actually, it was a different name for the territory when the British had it, but it was called the Northwest Territories under the Americans. But beyond that, That was what happened. The war, the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, ended up depleting the coffers of the UK. So to be able to raise the funds, they started to levy taxes, and specifically on the United States, or the 13 colonies. And the reason why the taxes were levied against the 13 colonies is because the war was literally fought because of us. That's something that they don't really tell you in the books, or they don't really tell you about the start of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. The whole thing started because, y'all wouldn't believe it, the future president of the United States, George Washington, who was an officer in the British Army, actually ended up traveling into the Ohio Valley and was attacked by the native tribes, fired back, and the war started as a result of that. So the war literally started because of the colonies, but still at the same time, the British raised taxes on the 13 colonies. The colonies didn't really have an issue with the taxes being raised. The issue is that the colonies didn't get representation in Parliament. And that's where the phrase, the big one, that was a big slogan at the time, no taxation without representation, came from. Because the 13 colonies felt that if taxes were to be raised on them, they should have representation in Parliament, so that way they could actually vote on that taxation. Now, this is coming from a little bit of a spoiled perspective, though, to take the side of the British. The colonies operated off of a very benevolent sort of a principle. The British had practically no taxes throughout most, if not all, of the colonies because they were trying to encourage colonization. And the way to encourage colonization is to give people a profit incentive. So they created this profit incentive for people to go over there, and the 13 colonies became wildly successful as a result. And then the British cut off that benefit for the large part and started to raise the taxes. A lot of these were called the Townshend Acts or the Intolerable Acts, and they were viewed wildly unpopular by the colonists, or at least some of them. Some of them got it and why the taxes were being raised, others didn't. We would end up calling those people the Patriots. Nevertheless, so it started a massive sort of a back and forth in America about what should be done, a great deal of tension. And finally, in 1774, I believe it was, the people, who we call patriots now, who were very unhappy with the taxes, ended up banding together. They conducted the Boston Tea Party in the Boston Harbor, throwing tea overboard pretty much as a form of it was actually kind of like a form of violent protest. There was a decent amount of violent protest here in America, or riots to an extent over the taxes. But they threw the tea over. I believe that actually happened a couple of years earlier than 1774, if I'm correct. But anyways, they threw over the tea. There was that whole deal. And then the Continental Congress started to convene before the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, which were the Patriots. And they started to say that we should, what should we do? Should we tell the British that we're going to do this if they don't stop the taxation? Or should we just try and break away altogether? And then that was pretty much decided for them when the British marched out of Boston to Lexington and Concord to attempt to seize weapons that the colonists were beginning to build up, or the Patriots were beginning to build up to begin a possible armed uprising against the crown, meaning that by the British attempting weapon seizures, the conflict pretty much started right then and there, and then that's how the Revolutionary War began. So while Zelensky could have said it would have been their 1776, at least off of how history is taught in America, and I added in a lot of additional stuff that isn't really taught in America that kind of makes it a tit for tat, there's no right party in the conflict sort of an approach, but if you're to go off of the American way that it's taught, the Americans had a justified reason for going up against the British. With how the war in Ukraine is talked about in some circles, or at least when the president made that claim, they make it sound like the Ukrainians are fighting a war just to con people out of money. So that probably would have been taken as great offense at the time. Honestly, it doesn't matter what Zelensky said during that meeting. Anything Zelensky said would have been contrived as being hostile or offensive, because that was largely the intent as soon as he showed up, was to just pretty much lambaste a guy. Because you could tell by the way the whole thing was approached and the standoff, it was a pre-planned sort of a thing that the office of the president had in their handbook to get ready to go and pull out on him. So if he had said that, they would have said, "How dare you, try and contrive your crookery to be that of our greatest founding fathers." It would have been something like that. But still, I hope that does address that the best I can. A huge thanks to you for that massive, amazing support, LC39A, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running, and we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, We are on to the next one. Also, really quickly, let me make sure to blot that one out on the spreadsheet. And we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from the Exotic Parallel. And Exotic Parallel said, how will the collective might of Belarus, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea compare to the World War II Axis powers? Modern versus old Axis powers. It would actually be incomparable. The modern Axis powers, even as weak and lame as they look, have firepower far beyond measure of what anyone had in World War II. Just to make the idea even more so the case, we dropped, I think it was 5 times the amount of bombs on Vietnam in the Vietnam War as the U.S. dropped bombs throughout the entirety of World War II everywhere in the world. 5 times over. That's pretty crazy when you think about it. And that kind of firepower disparity is even more so prevalent today. With each passing of a decade, the amount of firepower that we can use conventionally massively increases, and also the precision of that firepower massively increases as well, and so does the firepower of our enemies. So the Chinese actually have, in their own country alone, the combined firepower of probably about 3 Axis powers worth, even right now, just in what they can do at the moment, with an army that isn't even as big as the ones they had in the Second World War. It's a little bit crazy how it works, but that's generally what I would say, is that the modern Axis powers probably have multiple factors of firepower grander than that of the old Axis powers of World War II in a full duration of a conflict. That would be my answer to that, because that was also proven by the U.S. in Vietnam as a standalone. But still, a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one, which is a 5 from Catalpa Rescue. And Catalpa said, for your Twitter issue, try clearing the cache on your PC. And thank you so much for the support. And I've got to say that we will try and clear the cache. Maybe that'll help out a little bit. Maybe it'll help out to clear out lots of cache. Who knows? But still, a big thanks once again. I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 5 from Hoodoo, Texas. And Hoodoo, Texas says, Iranian work crews using explosives to take down damaged structures? Possibly, but these explosions are happening in areas that we haven't really heard about them before, and we haven't heard the Iranian government saying that they're controlled detonations or demolitions, which they'd usually say if they were wanting to cover up something that happened, or if it actually was exactly what was happening. We haven't been hearing that, so it's leading me to believe that these may be explosions that are being created by Mossad operatives that are still operating inside of the country. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one, which is a 5 from Jack Ragnarsson. And Jack Ragnarsson, he said, you know what is a cool artillery system? The Swedish GRK PVV 90 millioner. And let me go pull that up. GBR. Let's see. Let me make sure I get it right. The GRK PBV 90 millioner. And let's go take a little gander at this. Oh, I've never seen this one before. Built on the CV90 chassis, though. And it's a mortar system. That is actually pretty sick. I'm not going to lie. It's actually a dual mortar. That is really sick. That's actually incredibly cool. I got to say, I've never heard of this system before, Jack. But let's see. And then the Finnish Amos. Let's see here. Let's see. Amos mortar. Let's go take a look at that. Oh, so it's fairly similar. It's built. It looks like it's built on Arasimac, but that is actually, those are really cool systems. Those are incredibly neat due to the fact that they're dual barreled. You don't really see those kinds of designs really anywhere in the world, but I gotta say, out of the two, for some reason, the CV90 Mjolnir is making more of an impact on me. It just looks incredibly cool. The Amos is really cool, but this one, I don't know. It's impressive, that I will say. These things are really cool. And just look at them. I mean, that thing is neat. And Cody Fritz did say it right. It is named after Thor's hammer, which is from Norse mythology, really Scandinavian mythology for the large part. But I really like this thing. Thank you for sharing it, by the way, and thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep rolling. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we couldn't see a cool weapon system like this. I mean, this thing is just really neat. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Price Guider. And Price Guider said, he is certainly not doing anything wrong. Keep up the solid reporting. He's referring to his comedic timing comment saying, free Matt. And I'd have to thank you for the support. And I'd also have to say, free my boy Matt. He did nothing wrong. The internet's just crappy where he's at. I don't know why it always has to be the case, though, right when we're going on a show. The internet connection was fine for him pretty much throughout the whole day until now. And I was like, this This is sad. This is it's very sad. I don't like it at all, and I wish it was different. But beyond that, I got to thank you so much once again, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running. And hopefully, Enforcer Matt will be back on air sometime soon. He didn't do nothing wrong. But with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat for the Mons. And for the Mons said, found new guys in the community 3 weeks ago. Couldn't be happier. Also appreciate the no politics, just straight battle facts. Absolute legends. And thank you for the support for the Mons. And we are happy to know that you joined this channel just recently. And we're happy to know that you're here to stay. A lot of people end up finding this channel, and they ended up, everyone ends up usually saying that they are here to stay. We love to know that, because we try our best to make this show as presentable, as good as it possibly can be. And every time we hear words like that, we know that we're doing pretty well, because people come here, they want to stay. And not only that, the community is really good as well. And also, they're a great reason to stay too. A lot of them are incredibly intelligent, very smart, and know what they're talking about. And so a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. This is a 5 from David. And David said the M28 or the M29, Davy Crockett. And you know what? I actually just saw someone made a video on that thing the other day. And this is something that I've actually seen before and looked at before. It is a nuclear mortar. A little bit weird, at least in concept. These things actually were used in Europe, or at least deployed in Europe, up until the late 70s when they were finally pulled from service. But this thing is actually a recoilless gun that fires a small warhead. It is pretty much the closest thing to a Fallout Fat Man, like mini nuke launcher that you can find. This is it. Like, this is the real life version of it. It's an incredibly unique little system. It does fire a nuclear mortar round, and it ends up causing a decent amount of damage. It's not an incredibly large amount of damage. This isn't like a massive strategic nuclear bomb going off. It's fairly small. I think it's like 20 tons of TNT, which is still a lot, for the size of the explosive, but, it's not anything crazy. System's pretty neat. And I gotta say, thank you for the support and sharing it. Rather than that, they really didn't see any service, so there's not really much more to say than they were put into Europe from the 50s to the late 70s and then retired from service, and that they had a 20-ton TNT yield of explosive inside of the warhead for the large part. But still, I hope that does address it the best I can. And let's see here. Yeah, it actually was 20 tons of TNT. I did get that correct. That's pretty neat. I can't believe I actually got that right. But anyways, big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, it is time for us to move on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Cody Fritz. And Cody Fritz said, hey, speaking of trains of thought, check out the Spirit of Jasper here in small Indiana City. Take a peek around. It is a nice place. And thanks, and LSA. And you know what? We will take a look at the Spirit of Jasper. Why don't we take a look at the Spirit of a Jasper? Let's take a look. Oh, is this it? Let's see. The Spirit of Jasper in our small Indiana City. I think this is it. I think this is what you're talking about. And it is a small tourist train, like a heritage railroad, that uses what looks to be a 40-ton switcher to move the cars around. That's actually pretty cool. I think these things were called like critters, I believe. They're incredibly small. It's almost like a truck on the rails, but really cool. I got to thank you for the support, and I got to thank you for sharing this with us. And also, I like the inside of that car. It's actually pretty clean, I'll admit. I think it's rather nice. And let's see, it's in the town of Izhevsk. Let's take a little gander at the central part of the city here. Oh, they have a little courthouse. Man, this is kind of like dang, it's like that Universal Studios backlot movie set, that they used for like the Gremlins and Back to the Future. It looks a lot like that, actually. I would say that it was almost modeled off of this to a T. That's actually really. Yeah. Oh yeah. Like it, dude. You came in like you were like drowning in like a sea or something. It was like, I was like, what? I was like, okay. But still, really neat place. It's actually really cool. Let's take a look at what the pictures of Jasper actually look like. Oh, so you'll have a mill. That's pretty cool. You have this mural here. It actually does show the train on the mural. That's actually pretty cool. Then someone actually took a picture of the rail cars. Let's see here. Let me turn my headset back on and just drop dead. You have the mill once again. That mill's a famous mill. They always tell you that they're milling around in Jasper. They're not wrong. They also have their courthouse which is really beautiful, actually, pretty nice. And it's just a really neat place, actually. I got to thank you for the support and sharing that with us. And there are actually a lot of heritage railroads throughout America. I hope to see a lot of them someday. But for now, I can only settle with maybe one or two that are kind of nearby, or maybe some that'll be near to Enforcer HQ 3.0 here in the future. And so with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, it is time for us to move on to the next one, which is a $4 super chat from Pleasoth, who didn't throw in a comment, but we're greatly appreciative of the support. We also have a $2 super chat from LSA Sergeant Figman. And LSA Sergeant Figman said, hit the like button. That's in order. And hey, hit the like button, baby. That is in order. And I gotta thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep rolling. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, LSA Sergeant Pigment, we would have never been able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to make it possible right now. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $2 super chat from Conbay7X. And Conbay said, Happy Canada Day, and Happy Canada Day to all the Canadian viewers. I hope you all had a great celebration of your nation's independence once more today. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 2 from Exotic Parallel. And Exotic Parallel said, Myth Tsar Bomba useless, needs plane, no ICBM. I actually believe that the Tsar Bomba was so big, let me check this, that it couldn't even be dropped by a plane. I think it was an experimental bomb. Let me check this. Oh, let's see here. Oh, actually, it was dropped from a Tu-95. Huh. I thought it was actually detonated from some sort of like a testing, like a stand or something like that. Like some other American bombs were tested from. But apparently no, it's actually droppable from a Tu-95. It is pretty much useless in the modern day. There would be no use for a Tsar Bomba. And also the Tsar Bomba was just made to see how big one could get. They actually cut it down in half. It was supposed to be 100 megatons, and then they cut it down to about 50, because the scientists were scared that the explosion would be so strong that it might actually split open the Earth's crust. So they didn't make a 100 megaton bomb. They only made a 50 megaton bomb, but that was still wildly crazy enough that no one ever tried to recreate that again. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And dang, Matthew's throwing out the straight facts. He said Tsar Bomba was fatter than Chris's mom on Tuesday after eating all those plump birds. Damn! Enforcer Matt is taking shots in the chat. Holy smokes, everyone. I've never seen anything like that. That is a comment for the ages right there. Someone needs to clip that and frame it somewhere in a house. Like that is actually a pretty good one. But with that, I hope that addresses that well, Exotic Parallel. But yeah, pretty much useless in the modern day. And it was even useless back then, really, even when it was tested. It was pretty much already useless by that point. And moving on from that, we have a $2 super chat from Axel R. And Axel R said, lots room, have Ethernet ports, try wired connection. And that is an interesting idea. Hopefully, one day we will try that. So big thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one, which is a 2 from Dan D. Damn, Danny! And Dan said, hi, the Enforcer, and hi, Enforcer Matt. And a big hello on behalf of both of us to you, Dan D. We hope that you've been having a good day today. And I hope that you've been enjoying our stream so far. So a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to say hi. So a big thanks once again. And with that, we are on to our final super chat of the night so far, which is a $1 super chat from Justin Taylor. I've got to thank you so much for the support, Justin. You didn't throw in a comment, but each and every single bit of support counts, whether it be $500 or $1. We thank you all greatly. And Justin, we thank you massively, because you've gone out of your way today to support the channel and help it keep rolling, and we are always massively appreciative and thankful for folks like y'all who enjoy this channel and want to help it to keep running, because folks like y'all make the world go round here in the Leaf Spring Army. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, folks, we actually have time tonight to get to some live chats. And boy, howdy, do we have a decent amount of them, folks. We can actually get to all of them before we get off. And so, let us begin. Lettuce. Get it? It's like a lettuce. Oh, actually, we have another super chat, a $10 super chat from SSOPM. And SSOPM said, is it reasonable to claim that politicians care more for that their wives... let's see. Okay, I can read this. This is actually okay. Is it reasonable to claim that politicians care more for what their wives and other men think of them rather than being technically correct on what is best for the future of their respective countries? No, I would actually say that's fairly reasonable to an extent. A lot of people who are in government don't really care at least in the modern day, what is good in the long term for their country. Really, that's actually true for a lot of leaders historically. That's what divides the good leaders from the bad leaders. The good leaders actually think long term. The bad leaders think in the short term. And I would say that at least in the modern day, like every other era in history, there are a lot more bad leaders than there are good ones that focus and prioritize the short term over the long term. So I'd actually agree with you. I'd say that that's a generally reasonable claim to make for pretty much everyone out there at this point. But with that, I hope that addresses that somewhat well. A big thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, it is finally time for us to get on into the live chats, and specifically the Morse code decoders of the stream. And they got the Morse code dead on the nail, because it read, "Can you believe what the Iranians did today? Doesn't look peaceful to me. Long live the East Spring Army." And that was actually the Morse code message from Sunday. I congratulate you for getting that correct again. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to switch it out today because there was a lot of stuff I was having to try and knock out before the show, like going and getting coffee. But I do congratulate you all for getting that correct, because the Lee Spring Army Signal Corps continues to get that correct every single day it's run, even today when it's an identical message. So a big thanks to you all so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, it is time for us to move on into our live chat. Starting off with a live chat from Run and Gunny. And Run and Gunny said, "Do you think Russia will launch a large-scale retaliation in response to the missile factory being hit?" I'd probably think not. This sort of stuff actually happens commonly in Russia, so they'll most likely just continue to launch their normal phases of attacks without really too much concern about the missile factory being hit. So I hope that addresses that well. And we also have a question from Dragon. And Dragon said, "If Russia decides to bring in chemical or biological weapons, do you think at least the rest of NATO outside the U.S. would enter?" That is a tough one, because by entering, they would be taking an offensive action. They could take an offensive action with the support of the United Nations, if we're working off of that useless framework, or they could start to enter it individually on their own, but they couldn't enter it with the NATO declaration of an Article 5. They would have to enter it on their own, because it would be a preemptive action where they are joining a conflict in support of another country, instead of fighting a battle defensively in defense of all of their allies. So they would actually have to enter that one by one, but I have a feeling that a lot of countries will start to join if it became clear that the Russians were using biological or chemical weapons inside of Ukraine. So I hope that answers that well. And we're on to the next one, which is a question, a live chat from Peter Chanel. And Peter Chanel said, "Did Russia take control of New Luhansk? I need confirmed reporting." They've taken control of pretty much all of Luhansk in practical senses. There is a small part that the Ukrainians still control around Makivka, but it's pretty much an effective, complete control by the Russians of the Luhansk Oblast. So I hope that answers that well, and it's pretty much been the case since 2023 for the large part. But moving on from that, we also have a question from Born in Ukraine. And Born in Ukraine said, "I'm a bit behind on the stream and just watched the crash and death of the Su-34 fighter jet. Who is responsible for eject parachute maintenance? Thanks." And I'll say that would be the ground maintenance crews and parachute riggers, whose specific jobs are to make sure that those parachutes on those ejection seats are properly mounted and fitted. So generally, everything that went wrong due to the death of one of the pilots and also the failing of the landing gear could all be traced back to the maintenance crews on the ground and their ineptitude or incompetence due to some sort of issue. But that issue would have to be determined through a later inquiry or an investigation. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are moving on to the next question, which is from Axel K. And Axel K said, "Do we know what type of weapon systems and missiles are being halted by the U.S.? It's all over the news, but I can't find the details. It appears to be precision-guided munitions like the M982 Excalibur round, the GMLRSs, and the Patriots. Pretty much all of the precision-guided munitions we've been giving Ukraine so far that have been pretty important for them to use. We're pretty much stopping the shipments of all of those." It's a little bit weird, because we were actually going to give 5 retired Patriots from Israel to Ukraine, and now those Patriots won't even have missiles to work with. But that was the specific kind of munitions that are being halted or stopped at the moment, which I find to be a little bit goofy, and I don't really agree with the justification that they're giving. And of course, Matt is correct. The esophagus did collapse there for a brief moment. The call quality isn't that great, but it is great enough to hear an esophagus collapse from time to time. But I hope that does address that well. And we also have a question from Flippity Flop. Flippity Flop said, "Question: Do you think Ukraine would demand Russia to dispose all of its nuclear weapons as a compensation for the war?" No, because generally, as if you made that demand for compensation, the Russians could just make the demand, "Okay, we'll denuclearize by firing these at you," and then that kind of stops it right there. So, you really can't denuclearize the Russians. Once a country has a nuclear weapon, there's no way to take it from them. That's why you generally have to stop them from getting one in the first place, because there's really no way to work around the fact that they could just kill everyone if they wanted to, if they got angry enough. And so with that, I hope that addresses that well. And we also have a question from Robert Planting. And Robert Planting said, will leadership controversy in China press the aggressive posture? Maybe. It's a little bit hard to say. We don't know how big the coup or the unhappiness is with Xi. We do know that the PLA though is wildly unhappy with him in general. So it may push some aggressiveness, but at the same time, it may also push them to be a little bit more reserved and focus on the political infighting in the CCP and the PLA more so than any sort of external growth plans like taking Taiwan. So I hope that does address that well. And we're on to the next one, which is another question from Dragon. And Dragon said, does China have further plans outside the Philippines and Taiwan, such as Australia and Japan? They do have a plan of creating a large sphere of influence, largely centered around the Indian Ocean, where everyone who has any kind of a border, or more so a coastline with the Indian Ocean, will be a part of a Chinese economic sphere. So generally with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, they really want to make those into economic puppets of China, more so than an actual part of China. So they do have greater plans, but those plans materializing will probably be decades down the road, because the One Belt, One Road program was supposed to be lightning fast, and it's actually going a lot slower than even the Chinese plan, and they've openly admitted that nowadays, that the One Belt, One Road program is really tough to actually get off the ground. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And we also have a question from Exotic Parallel. And Exotic Parallel said, oh, I see. I'm trying to type Tsar Bomba. Any suggestions so you guys know what I'm asking? Yeah, just type Tsar Bomba. I think that would probably be a good one. But with that, I hope that answers that well. And we're on to the next one, which is from Kim Bennett. And Kim Bennett said, I'm wondering if y'all can touch on about the hunter-killer recon platoons within the U.S. Army to be used against China when the raids begin in Taiwan. Thanks and good stream. I would have to look into that a little bit. I haven't really focused a lot on the hunter-killer recon platoons. I do know that the Army's been changing and the Marines have been changing a lot of their doctrine recently to largely start focusing on conventional warfare in Europe and also island fighting in the Pacific. But I couldn't really speak to the exact details of what's happening at the platoon level, at least at the moment. So unfortunately, I'd have to declare ignorance at the moment and look into that a little bit more to be able to talk about it at greater depth. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the second to last question of the night, which is from Colin L. And Colin L said, did you or the enforcer see the China drones being tested? It looked like many UFOs above the clouds. Yes, we did. Actually, we covered that a couple of days ago. We have the video right there. It's the one that was covered on Sunday about the drone swarm. And it appears that they're experimenting with drone swarms being used in combat, which is going to be an interesting principle, because I'm guessing that they're AI operated. So I don't know how that would really work in practice, but it is interesting nonetheless. Probably will work off of a hive mind where they send enough drones as needed to each target, and the AI decides what targets to hit, which how many drones will need to hit that specific target, and all that sort of stuff as it goes. It's pretty interesting though. And so with that, also, thank you, Exotic Parallel, for clarifying. I was wondering, I was like, what kind of question is this? I was like, I don't really know how to answer that, because also your super chat did come through, I think. But still, I hope that does also address that well. And we are on to the final question of the night. And the lucky last person who asked the lucky last question of the night is Philip Southern. And Philip Southern said, how do LSA members feel about the LSA becoming a new third political party? How do you guys figure your path to the presidential race? And that is an interesting question, Philip Southern, because I wouldn't actually know how well the LSA would do as a third party. The answer is to do terribly. It's just that how terribly would it do? Would it do badly or would it do horrendously? That's really the question, because the United States survives at this point on a two-party political system, and if you're not in the Republicans or the Democrats, you just don't really have a shot. So with that in mind, you could kind of make the LSA a movement within one party or the other, but actually making it an independent political party would be next to impossible. But beyond that, I actually would not know, at least working off of that framework, how to get there. It would be a really tough kind of a sell for a lot of people. Not really a lot of people would buy on, because they would be straight red ticket or blue ticket all the way. and then they wouldn't even give us the time of day. So with that, I hope that does address that the best we can, Philip Southern. And with that, we have actually reached the end of tonight's stream, about an hour ahead of schedule. I've got to thank you all so much once again for enjoying the stream tonight, because 110,000 people have watched this stream in the course of 2.5 hours. And not only that, we had a peak viewership tonight of 14.3 thousand people. We are entirely honored and appreciative to have all of y'all here, and we hope that y'all enjoyed greatly. If you did enjoy, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. I also might make a short war video tomorrow, depending on how much news there is, but we will see you all at 10 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow to cover the next 24 hours of war news. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, and Slava Ukrainian! Long live the Lee Spring Army! The Lee Spring Army will never die.